my calculations are correct, when this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious It has begun!
Calm down, Doctor. Now is not the time for fear.
Time to misbehave.
Give them nothing, but take from them everything!
Program complete. Enter when ready.
Greetings once again, my friends, and welcome back to another Geek News Roundtable Discussion, aka the MMO show? I think that's officially what this is getting called. I don't know. We're going to keep it in the Roundtable Discussion. I am your host, Adam Mickelson, aka Drak. I hope everybody's having an awesome day or night when you're listening to this. And joining me is, I love that some of our viewers have officially coined this, the unofficial fourth guy of the podcast, Rising Sun Reviews. Rising Sun, how are you doing this fine evening? And most importantly, because people want to know, what fast food are you consuming?
What did I have for dinner tonight? Oh, Mules and Company. That was good.
I forgot to actually, I was going to text you like at noon today going like, make sure to bring home fast food and we'll just eat together on the podcast and annoy the shit out of people.
Oh, that'd be perfect. Like, mess with the audio, get sidetracked about more fast food, make me hungry, make me have to go get a Taco Bell in the middle of the podcast. That would be fun.
Exactly. That's what I wanted. But unfortunately, my daughter needed her hair done. So, you know, we can blame it on my daughter. She's totally fine with it.
Okay, she'll bring us fast food there, right?
Exactly. We'll send her out walking for it. That'll be great exercise for her. But we're here to talk more MMO stuff. Usually we have Brinton Volley joining us, but unfortunately, we scheduled this right in the middle of finals for him, and dang that Brinton and his master's degree of all things. So he is probably most likely sleeping on a couch right now after having to submit like what was it, a 50-60 page paper or something like that.
Oh, was that his thesis or just a paper?
I thought it was his dissertation when I heard 60 pages, but no, I guess it's not that. Because he's not anywhere near done yet. So at that point, apparently psychology degrees are that complicated.
Why would anyone want a master's degree? I say as I have one.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, I'm the one who basically has like generals, so I'm not even one anywhere remotely ready to talk to either of you guys about how you spend your time. But we're here to talk more MMOs, because in case people don't know this, we have an MMO about to drop, or an MMO expansion about to drop in a month. And most importantly, the following month, we have WoW The War Within is going to drop. And so we've actually had quite a number of events happen, including the War Within Alpha, which we've been able to glean some information without spoiling ourselves on it. Just really quick before we start getting into the stories, what leaked information have you gotten from the alpha, and have you enjoyed what you've seen? Like, have you taken a look at how the classes work and stuff like that?
I've looked at like some of the like class trees and stuff. I haven't like seen in depth how they work. I also have not pre-ordered, so I don't have alpha or beta, so I haven't been able to actually try anything.
Yeah, most of my stuff has been from like Preach, seeing some of how the classes work, and some of them look pretty cool, and then like some spoilings of info from like Wowhead and MMO Champion, but that's been about it.
Yeah, like I like looked at the like hero towns for the classes I'm interested in, which I think I talked about this last time. They look like pretty good. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's hard for me to judge until I actually play it myself.
I don't think I've ever actually asked this. Like, given how busy our schedules are, like, there's obvious reasons why we can't get alpha access and why we can't, you know, go into the beta. If you had the opportunity, like, do you tend to be that person who wants to go into the beta and just mess around and spoil everything before getting the actual product, or would you wait for the sake of just not spoiling yourself?
I feel like what I've done before is like I'll do a couple dungeons just to get like a feel of the class, but I'm not going to do any of the story stuff.
Right. Yeah. Because like the last beta that I did was Legion, and the only reason I did it because I didn't even do the WoD, or I did a little bit of the Mists of Pandaria beta, but like WoD I didn't do. Legion I did because, quite frankly, all of the class lore that came out of it. And so at that point, that's when I decided, okay, I'm doing videos on every class, every order hall and every artifact, because I just love the concept of the artifacts. But
Yeah.
I dug no further into any of it because I wanted to do that. I didn't even want to touch the dungeons, because to me, dungeons and raids are like the finest polish that the game gets. And so I don't even touch those things in alpha and beta. I'd rather just go in when they're in finished product kind of thing. But like, if I had the free time, I don't think I would, honestly. I don't even think I would have done it for Dragonflight or War Within or even Midnight. I'm just kind of not there, but maybe I'm just in my own camp. So that being said, so we do have alpha coverage that we can get into tonight, but the first thing that we need to get into, because I'm going to try and keep this as chronological as I can, people might remember when we covered the WoW roadmap, there was this mysterious pirate flag that was on it, and we didn't really know what it was until it officially got revealed as WoW Plunderstorm. It was a limited time event that basically was a battle royal, but with WoW-esque elements into it. So basically, now you have actually done it. So if I get things wrong, Rising Sun, you can correct me on this. But the way I understand it is, you were in basically one great big area, and it was, I think, a completely PvP environment, but it wasn't like you picked a class or anything like that. You all came in as pirates, and then you were able to get scrolls or glyphs that allowed you certain abilities like Fireball or Ice Bolt or stuff like that. But it was basically, you collected all this stuff as pirates, and then you just fought it out. And it was a limited time event for like 3 weeks, I want to say.
That was more than that. Yeah, like it was basically like Fortnite with pirates inside the WoW engine.
Right, exactly. And that's primarily kind of why I didn't mess around with it. Because the second I heard Battle Royale, I'm like, I've got other things to do. Nothing against those who enjoy that. Like, for you, great. I actually got into fights with people basically saying, like, I don't care that they did this limited time event. It's just the event that they announced wasn't interesting to me. Like, just to clarify, I don't care that you do these limited time events. That's a great idea. It changes up the gameplay for people. It's just the event you announced wasn't keen for me.
Yeah, like I played one match, I died right away. I didn't like it, so I just never played it again.
Do you get to keep the stuff that you get in them, and then you just carry on into the next match, or?
Not. I think there might be some of that, but for the most part, I think it's just like, it's like Fortnite, where you like get all your weapons for that game. Mm-hmm. You have to get them every game.
Okay.
There might be like some sort of like progression in it, but I did not play enough to know, because like I didn't care enough to really get into it.
Right. And that was kind of my thing, is like, as soon as they announced, first of all, like, it was a pirate event that was basically Battle Royale, I was not invested in it. But I actually did like the fact that, like, a lot of guild mates and a lot of people who hadn't played WoW for a while came back for Plunderstorm. And the main reason that they did was because it was like the, I don't know what they're called now, but the old school arena servers, where when they would get ready to do the arena tournaments, and it was basically like this fresh slate that you'd be able to walk into, optimize yourself to whatever extent, and then you could go in and increase your arena score with that. That's what that sounded like to me, which to me, that's not a bad thing. Because,
and
like, maybe you'll have some account perks because of it, but ultimately it's a clean slate. You don't have to worry about this person having this prestigious weapon or whatnot.
Yeah, and in a way that is good. That way it's like you're not at a disadvantage because you haven't played much. You just like jump into it if that's what you're into.
Exactly, and that's who that is catering to. So I don't necessarily have a problem with it. But ultimately, that's the most that we can say about it, because you only did it for a little bit, and I was not interested in the Plunderstorm event at all. But I loved how many people came out and said, well, you're this diehard WoW fan. How can you be upset about this? Because it's a change in the gameplay. Well, first of all, like, I'm not playing every day because I'm editing stuff and whatnot. And on top of that, it didn't cater to my niche. And by that point, I believe Season 4 was pretty much right after Plunderstorm. So at that point, I had Season 4 to look forward to.
Yeah.
And that was totally up my alley. And for whatever I've been able to play of Season 4, I have enjoyed. Especially in the dungeon scene, because I can't even believe it. They made heroics relevant again. And so now I can go and do heroics for people who aren't properly geared. And then I can go into Mythic Plus and I don't have to, I can push myself however I want to, but it's enjoyable. And we get to have our last hurrah in the Dragonfly dungeons. Just curious, have you been able to mess around with Season 4 at all?
Yeah, I've cleared most of the raids. I haven't done that much dungeon-wise, but I did a couple last night because my raid group had 6 people show up, so...
Yeah, I've actually been messing around with the LFR incarnations of the Awakened raids, just because I need to get raid footage eventually for questing with Drak. So I've been enjoying that, and I gotta say this, the one thing I do have a beef with is the weekly quest, and the only reason I have a problem with it is I liked how they had it originally before Season 4, where you had like 2 to 3 choices of like, you could go do this, you could go do this, you could go do this. And you had that one task, and then you got your chest at the end of it. And the way that they've set it up for Season 4 is basically, okay, you're doing everything that you need to do when Vault of the Incarnates was relevant. Oh, you need to go and do everything you had to do when Aberrus was relevant. And that's my beat, is like, it would have been cooler if they just said, oh, okay, well, you either get to choose which of the events that you do for that given thing, or you get it randomly, kind of thing. Because I like the fact of not having 4 different tasks that I now have to keep track of. It just would have been cooler if it was one set task. And then at that point, I can make the choice to do the others if I want to.
Yeah, so I think what they did before, like in the earlier seasons, it was like, here's a task, you also have to get like 3,000 rep or 1,500 rep with the new faction.
Which I didn't care too much about the 3,000 rep. It could have been less, but...
Yeah, but now they remove the rep, and now it's just like, okay, do these 3 events from the 3 patches or whatever.
Yeah, and at that point, like, if people want to compromise, and it's just like, okay, you have to go and get 1,500 rep, and then you just go and do the community feast instead of the other things, I'd be okay with that, because getting the rep is actually a lot easier than people think it is. All you have to do is spam the right world quests and you can get it done really fast. Or if you have an alt that hasn't done any of the story stuff,
it's fast.
Oh yeah, dude, you nuke through it so quickly, especially if it's for example, if it's the what is it called, the Zeralek Caverns or the Emerald Dream, and you haven't done the story for that, 1 chapter will nuke it for you. It's wonderful. So that's really my only beef with it. But overall, Season 4 has been enjoyable for me. And then we got to go into the next major limited time event, which I believe is still going on for like another week. And that
no, it's like 2 more months.
Oh, it's 2 more months. Okay.
Like right up until the expansion.
And this one actually was a little bit more interesting to me because it was the time running. Specifically, this was the WoW Remix Mists of Pandaria. So, Rising Sun, you were kind of right when it came to a lot of the stuff. Unfortunately, we weren't right in the way that we really wanted, which was that the old school dungeon sets would come back.
This is what happens when I come up with something completely crazy. It's not going to be right, but I got a surprisingly amount close.
No, yeah, you got it almost on the mark, because primarily what the whole thing was is you go into this limited time server, you create a character, and you can go through either like the story of Mists of Pandaria if you've never done it before, or they had the time. I didn't even know this until somebody told me the Timeless Isle was available. For some reason, I thought they just made Pandaria available. But no, they made the Timeless Isle available, so you can nuke through leveling very quickly in that, and then you can go and do the raids and the dungeons and whatnot. But the thing that tied it all together was the collection of a currency, we'll call it a currency, for lack of a better term, called Bronze. And Bronze was where all of the aesthetics came into it. So you technically could buy gear with it that you could upgrade and eventually go into the raids, but you could also purchase things like mounts, pets, toys, and even full transmog ensembles for specific classes. So for example, if you're having trouble getting like those 2 pieces from Siege of Orgrimmar on your warrior, you could just go buy the whole ensemble for however many bronze, and then you never have to worry about it again. And of course, it's account bound. So in a lot of cases, I actually think this was an amazing thing for players that are looking for a bit of a break, looking for something new, because it's not the current expansion. It's an expansion that's like 3 or 4 expansions ago, and they could go and work on the things that they wanted to do. And I think that's especially helpful considering that I believe they said some of the mounts that are really hard to obtain were also available in it for bronze on limited weeks. And so those who are like trying to farm the Shaw of Anger, you had a chance of getting that mount and being able to not have to farm Shaw of Anger anymore. I'm not going to complain about that.
Yeah, I've played it quite a bit actually. I've gotten 3 characters leveled through it.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, it's
for me, it's just been like I've bounced in. I've seen how the bronze works. I haven't even checked everything that can be bought with the bronze, but immediately as soon as people told me what the bronze was for, I'm like, sold. They do this for any other expansion, and if I have the time, I would totally do it.
Yeah. So I've like played it quite a bit. It's really cool because like playing through it, I really think Mrs. Pandaria is probably one of the best stories they've ever had.
It really is, yeah. I
just
don't
like
know why
going.
I don't know why it gets shafted all the time. It was actually a really good story experience.
Yeah, like I remember when I first played Jade Force, like it was probably like my favorite zone, and
Right.
like going through it again, like it holds up.
Most importantly, both sides hold up too.
Yeah. And like I mainly play Horde, but I've done I did a playthrough of Alliance on my first time writing characters, like to see that story again.
Yeah.
I played through was it Landfall or the like 0.1 patch in the South?
Yeah,
like
Landfall is what it was called.
Yeah, like I played through the Alliance story there, which is the first time I've like fully gone through it, and like seeing that story, seeing the complement to the Horde one I'd played before.
Mm-hmm. The thing that has made me laugh the most is like some people that I know that are brand spanking new players, they really got attached to the scenarios. Like, man, we really wish these scenarios were still there. I'm like, guys, the scenarios just basically got integrated into story. Like, you don't have to worry about it. They're just integrated into the story. They're still here. I love that so many people don't even get that. It's just like, yeah, that final event in Warlords of Draenor that like would end a zone. Yeah, that was a scenario.
Yeah, so I kind of wish they like did more with the scenarios, like having them like like revisit those moments more, as opposed to like just being like one-off story things.
Oh, it absolutely would be cool if they started doing stuff like that. But I think ultimately the decision that just kind of came down with it was, okay, yeah, but then you basically are creating scenarios and dungeons and raids, and it gets complicated after that.
Yeah, and I guess that's true.
Yeah, this is why in a lot of cases we haven't really seen post-patch 5-mans anymore since Legion, is because it's too complex to try and create that dungeon plus create a raid. So they've just kind of decided this is the way that they go. But
and also just another thing I liked about going to Pandaria is like seeing like all the stories that build through it, like going from like the base story to the Thunder King, having the Alliance versus Horde and how that was building, the Vol'jin thing.
I loved a lot of those stories when I went through them the first time, like during the Pandaria expansion, and I actually think that that's one of the few times they actually got like post expansion events right. Because like looking back at Cataclysm and how they tried to do their patch structure and all that stuff, I always felt like they could have done more with the storytelling, specifically when it came to like the Firelands and when it came to most especially with Dragon Soul. It would have been cooler to have more events to better explain what the F we were doing in that final patch so that people could understand it. Because I still know people to this day who are like, yeah, we didn't even see this Hour of Twilight happen. Yeah, you did. It was the 5th boss in Dragon Soul. Like, really? That was the Hour of Twilight? Yeah, that was the Hour of Twilight. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's just like, wow, that could have been better explained.
Well, and I know we've talked before about like the stories in the more recent expansions, like Shadowlands, BFA, even Dragonflies. Like, I feel like Blizzard is pretty good at like having the first like the base expansion, like the questing introduces us to a story, the new characters, environment, etc. Normally does a pretty good job.
They're
But
getting
it's
better,
like
yeah.
but like after that, it's like the story just like really falls off. From like, okay, so what? How do all these tie together? There's like no satisfying payoff. It might be like a zone introduction, but then that tapers off, and then we get the raid, and there's like loose connections.
Yeah, they've had a real difficult time trying to juggle what is truly important about the patch. And they tried to accommodate to everybody, but then we had Shadowlands where they were, oh yeah, you know, all this currency that you have to go and get for all of these upgrades that you really want to go get. Yeah, you have to do the story in order to be able to do it. And you have to do the story to an insane amount, or to an insane extent. And so at that point, you are basically screwing yourself if you want to sit back and enjoy the story, because your raid team won't wait for you, kind of thing. And so they found a difficult way to balance it, and they still to this day are having it.
And even then, like even after you play through the story, it still doesn't feel that satisfying. Like in the Dragonflight, like we got the Emerald Dream, which was fine, and like I won't say it was bad, but when I compare that to like Siege of Orgrimmar and all the build up to that, and how like throughout Siege of Orgrimmar, like we knew a lot of the bosses that we were fighting. We had like Nazgrim, Malkarok, the Klaxi. Like the Klaxi were like, I loved their quest zone, and just like have them as a penultimate boss, like felt really good, except for the fact I wish they were around more because I liked them so much.
It would have been nice to have seen them in the escalation patch, because actually one of my complaints with Pandaria is that escalation patch, because they had tons of opportunities to be able to expand on characters like Malkarok and being able, because believe it or not, Malkarok was actually a big element in the books, and he was a nasty son of a bitch, and his conversion into this, I don't even know what you call it, you know, this Dark Heart of Pandaria fiend that you see him in the raid boss. It would have made more sense if people had gotten to see that transformation kind of happen on screen. And again, we didn't get it. So like that's actually the one place where I would argue is, yeah, in Escalation we got the cool scene where we found out about the Emperor's Pride. And so that kind of teased at the Shaw of Pride encounter in Pandaria, or in Siege. But most of the stuff that we got in Orgrimmar was like, oh, okay, go meet this camp. Oh, now you need to go and do this event every now and again, and you get a chance at better gear.
So like that's where I do feel like it was weaker, but it's still good, like see that build up to this actual siege.
Whereas we could have actually had like the Isle of Thunder, where we had that conflict between Jaina and Lorthamar, and actually like tried to showcase that both sides of this conflict had different reasons for wanting Garrosh gone, kind of thing.
Right. And I think what I really loved about, I know we're going kind of out of order, but going back to like the landfall, like how we saw Jaina's flip there to like wanting to peace, trying to obtain it. You have Anduin like peace at all, or really super for peace. Anduin wanting to fight or not Anduin, Varian wanting to fight the Horde. And like Jaina at first wanting peace, but after the Blood Elf Karen Tor are accused like taking the Divine Bell.
Yes.
It's like how that changes in her.
What's their sub name? Because it's the Silver Enclave for the Alliance. I can't remember, but yeah, I know what you're talking about, where they did the landfall quest. And actually, one of the things I love about that is that Jaina is pulled aside by Varian, who, like you said, that Varian was being super aggressive. At the beginning, he wasn't. He pulls Jaina aside. He's like, "You stupid bitch, what have you done? I was in negotiations to bring the Blood Elves back into the Alliance, and now you've screwed the pooch."
Yeah, so like she went too far, or well, arguably they all were going too far. But like Varian saying, like, "Okay, you're too far even for me."
Yeah, exactly. And then at that point he had to step in, and that's when we got the whole "Father, what are you doing? What a king must do" kind of line with Varian. And I loved how they set that up. Even he stood up to Tyrande, of all people, in one of the scenarios. And that was amazing to be able to watch. Yeah, there's amazing storytelling. But the other thing that I want to point out is yes, we had serious storytelling, because you brought up the Jade Forest, and that is an amazing experience. And frankly, it's one of those few experiences that I really wish Sori Dormi was available for early on, so that I could have the pristine Jade Forest instead of the destroyed one.
Oh, yeah.
Because I love that. But a lot of people forget this. The Pandaren, when they were first introduced, sorry, they were a joke race. And so at that point, you know, when Chen Stormstout was brought into the story, he was a joke character. And so then, you know, you had the seriousness of the Jade Forest, and then you bounced into the Valley of the Four Winds, and that's when we got kind of the jokey Pandaren culture that's built around family and whatnot. I love Jade Forest. I love Valley of the Four Winds just that much more because of the hokey family culture that we got about the Pandarens. And after that, that's, to me, that's kind of where things dip a little bit, because in my opinion, the Kunlai Summit isn't as powerful a story in between as when we get into the Townlong Steppes and we start dealing with the Mantit kind of thing.
Yeah, like the Summit, I think, is probably my least favorite of any of the zones.
Yeah,
like I like
the Summit has good moments, but the problem is that it's kind of experimenting with what the Mogu are. And because they, you know, the first raid is supposed to tie into it and show the origins of the Mogu. And so at that point, you kind of lose a lot of people in that process. In my opinion, the part where it starts to just trail off is after the Temple of the White Tiger. That's where it gets awesome, because then you have Zhuen actually confronting both factions and saying, yeah, you guys are not really doing this for me, and Terenzu making an like a very powerful argument to kick these guys off the island, and Zhuen is just like, let's let them stay here and see what happens, because, you know, he kind of looks at Anduin and at Bane and goes, they're not necessarily all warmongers, kind of thing.
Right.
And after that, that's when the story starts to get dull, because it becomes more and more of a, you have to set up an alliance encampment here, and then you have to go do Lucky Doos. What the fuck are Lucky Doos? Do we even care about Lucky Doos? And then you go into the Shadowpan. Whereas the Shadowpan should have been way more integrated into Kunlai.
Yeah, I feel like that would have made it better, because I like the Pandarians, how like they're more about like the farming and family and all that.
Yeah.
And they just have like such a strong personality that I feel like even though we haven't seen much from them for a long time, they're like super memorable.
Well,
and
I like how one of my guildies put it way back when, is that if instead of dealing with alliance bullshit or horde bullshit and Lucky Doos and stuff like that, wouldn't it have been cool to have like this Council of the Shadowpan, where like these various lieutenants that are training people and whatnot. And yeah, Terran hates us all, but we slowly kind of win over all of the other lieutenants on the council. And we basically kind of force Terenzu into the Shadowpan Monastery, which sets up the events of the dungeon kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
He gets sealed in there. He gets swallowed up by the Shaw of Hatred. Like, that would have been way better than what we got. Like, I get it. They wanted the funky Lucky Doos and all that. And also, they kind of wanted to set up the Yongle in the Kunlai Summit, but they're better set up in Townlong. It's complicated. But yeah, the story experience of Pandaria is probably one of the better ones they've had in like before Cataclysm. I mean, Cataclysm was so disjointed because of all the separate zones. It was cool to have like a flow to it again. So much so, they did it again in Draenor. and then we went into the Legion stuff where you can go wherever you want. So I was very happy that they did.
Yeah, and I feel like having the story connecting, even if they're like separate stories too, but they all feel like they contribute. Well, it seems like in a lot of the more modern ones, it's like there's an interesting story on its own, but it feels more disjoint with everything else.
And frankly, a lot of the scenarios are actually a lot more important than I think the story gave them credit for. Because remember, there were those mandatory scenarios. One of my favorites was the one where Varian goes to work with the Dark Irons, because it basically it sets up Moira as not this threat, but instead like somebody who's actually trying to change the Dark Irons from within, and trying to make the dwarves like not as untrustworthy as they were in Kata. So I like those moments, and we also had the Dark Heart of Pandaria one, but there were a couple in there that I think were important to the Jade Forest as well as the Valley of the Four Winds that just get brushed off. And that was kind of the crying shame to me. It's like, you could have made those mandatory scenarios as well, so people could at least experience the story.
I wonder if it would make more sense. Like, I know back when Pandora was out, there was like the incentive to like queue for a random scenario once a day. So I wonder if if you were playing then, you would have been more likely to see that.
Maybe, but I think one of the reasons they did that was the way they did things is they didn't want things to reach out to like 2 months. And so they basically made it so like every week, okay, we're only going to make like 2 of these scenarios and the rest is you go do what you want. Because one of the other ideas I'd heard was that the incident with the Divine Bell that kind of sets Garrosh and Anduin against each other, that was going to be a scenario. And they then decided against that because they wanted, they felt like players were going to complain because at that time, people didn't like how the scenarios basically had a timing kind of aspect. Things have to happen in their own course. And so they felt like that was going to be the same kind of reaction as they had for the Culling of Strathholm Caverns of Time, where like everybody's just sick and tired of the RP and they want to skip it.
Because that's like very heavy on RP, not too much combat. So you could be a scenario.
Eventually, the stuff that got added into Culling got added into the scenarios too. So like eventually they would have been fixed, and people would have stopped their bitching. Is all I'm saying.
Eventually,
yes. But yeah, overall, I actually enjoyed the remix. I hope they do it again. I've actually had a discussion with some people about like, if they were going to do a remix, like which expansion would you want to see next? And I've had some interesting arguments being made for quite a few of them. I want to bring it up to you, Rising Sun. If you got to pick the next remix expansion, what would you pick?
So I only started playing with Cataclysm, so I can't really comment on like Wrath or Burning Crusade, and I also don't feel like those would be good choices.
Okay.
Kata, as you're saying, it feels like too disjointed.
It really, like, I don't want to say bad things about it because I actually did like the Kata expansion for the most part. But the fact that you had Hyjal or Vashir, and Vashir is still, even to this day, a horrible slog to make its way through. There's a lot of good lore there, but unfortunately, it doesn't really get a payoff. So it's kind of disjointed, but maybe you wouldn't have to do it because there are catch-up mechanics in Cataclysm. For example, the Fireland stuff, you could easily do that.
Or maybe if they can make Vashir better, like make the underwater travel better. But I know they did like something with that, but I only played that once in all my times going through Kata, so...
The problem is that the maps are too expansive. Like it really feels like Vashir, they wanted to put a lot more in there. And in fact, one of the things I think the reason they made the maps as big as they did is because, I'm sure you've heard this, but the Firelands expansion was originally going to be, or the Firelands patch was going to be Fire and Ice, or Fire and Water. And
I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah, we were going to get not just the Firelands, except the Firelands would have been like 4 bosses long, and we would have gotten a Trial of the Crusader type dungeon called the Abyssal Maw, which would have been basically just like another Colosseum where we face various undersea enemies. And it would have been a big area and maybe would have encapsulated like one of the big Vespera-looking creatures in Vashir. So maybe that's why the maps were made as big as they were, was to more accommodate what came later. Except the problem is that the Abyssal Maw eventually got trashed because people hated people had a horrible reception of Vashir. And so they just 100% went into Fireland.
So they just jumped from that, yeah.
Yeah, because I guess one of the original things was like Beth Talak was going to be like a crab boss or something like that for the Abyssal Maw, and then they moved him to the Firelands. I think the same thing was for I can't remember the Hunter boss, but he was going to be one of them too, because you had to like clear out the Abyssal Maw and then he would come out.
Okay.
Kind of thing, but he didn't look the way he did before. It was one of those things because he looked like, he was easy enough to translate over into one of those Major Domo Executus kind of race, but originally he was going to be like a Naga kind of thing. And that would have made a whole lot of sense to me. Shannock, that was his name. And so you could have easily done that, but, there are catch-up mechanics that you could do to do a remix for Cataclysm.
Yeah, make it optional if you don't want to do Vashir every time.
I kind of find it funny. You wouldn't want a Wrath of the Lich King one. Just is that because you're not interested in going through that story, or?
So actually, I'm wondering if they would do that before The Last Titan, because if I remember right, Northrend is going to be like the zone for it.
Yes.
So
So basically, Midnight is going to be a revamp of Quel'Thalas, basically making
yeah,
Quel'Thalas much bigger. And then, Last Titan is going to revamp Northrend. And
yeah. So maybe they'll do that there and like focus on the Titan lore.
maybe. I see. Here's the thing. I think there's enough catch-up mechanics you could do Wrath of the Lich King, because all you'd have to do is start everybody up in the Origin tournament kind of thing, and you'd be able
Right.
to pull that off. And maybe that would be a cool way to be able to kind of say goodbye to classic Northrend, and then it goes away, and maybe we'll get Wrath of the Lich King Classic again, or something like that. But it's actually kind of funny. Like, most of the recommendations that I've gotten have been Mists of Pandaria again, because people really love that experience.
I'd be okay with that.
Legion remix, which I would not be against.
So
I love the experience.
I'm wondering for Legion if they would do Legion as their next one to tie into Midnight with like Illyria.
Probably,
because I feel like
either that or the one that I've heard a lot of people speculating is Burning Crusade, specifically because of all the Blood Elf lore, and that would tie into Laws.
Yeah, that could be too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because
it would make sense.
So one of the reasons I think they might have picked Pandaria, other than like it was a good idea, was because of the focus on Anduin, and if Anduin's a major character in the War Within,
probably.
So they might want to like, okay, here's like his big story expansion. Let's get you up to speed like how he was before everything happened.
Although the question that I would have is he more important than Illyria? Because Illyria is like the main focus of a lot of stuff. So at that point, I almost wonder if she kind of trumps him.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that he's going to be the main character in War Within, but it's like during the expansion cinematics, like it was Anduin and Thrall, and so having the contrast in mind of how Anduin was, who he was during Mists of Pandaria, contrast that with who he is now. I think that's an interesting way to highlight that part of the history of WoW to tie into it.
Yep.
So that's why I could definitely say Illyria being the focus if they do Legion time running right before Midnight, bring her back in the focus, remind people, okay, she's going to be a big character in Midnight. Here's a lot of stuff to know about her past, even if it was only like the final patch.
The interesting thing to consider for if they did a remix of Burning Crusade, that was the last time we dealt with the Ethereals. And that was the last time that we dealt with the Void in general. Like we mostly dealt with demons and old gods and stuff like that, but a lot of people forget this. There was a world boss, or not a world boss, but a group quest where you had to go and kill Dimensius the All-Devouring. And for those who don't realize who he is, Dimensius is the guy who killed the world of the Ethereals. He was the one who enveloped it. And so at that point, that might be actually a really great tie-in to Locust Walker and things like that. So you could easily do Burning Crusade. I just think there's this other half that doesn't really get a whole lot of love there. And that's like Black Temple, and the Naga obviously don't get a whole lot of love with that.
And I feel like the quest experience of Burning Crusade just wasn't as good. Before the remix, I started like delivering the character. I just decided, I've never like fully done the Burning Crusade quest experience. Let's do that. And like, yeah, this is very dated.
Yes, it's better than what it was in Classic, but it definitely still has a lot of stuff that they're trying to learn from. That's why Wrath of the Lich King was a huge improvement over Burning Crusade. And if I have to be honest, yes, it would be cool to do stuff with Dimensius and stuff like that, but ultimately, Legion would be a better experience to be able to do a lot of that, primarily because you have Argus. So you can go into Locust Walker as a character there and showcase Illyria as a character and kind of where she started in the current lore, as well as being able to mess around with void elements like being able to see Xalatath and where we first came across her. Because a lot of people may not know that lore. So I think it would be better to do a Legion remix as opposed to a Burning Crusade remix, Wrath has more elements that I think would work with a remix than BC, but I've gotten every answer under this, including a BFA remix, which I don't know. It just seems too soon to it seems too early to go into BFA, or even I actually did see somebody saying Shadowlands remix. Like, no, it's too soon for Shadowlands. People still have the post-traumatic stress from Shadowlands.
Yeah, I feel like people have enough issues with BFA and Shadowlands, like trying to bring those back now, like as a big feature, just that would not work. So an idea though with Midnight and tying into Legion remix. So what if one of the rewards for doing the Legion remix is getting like new artifact weapon appearances you can use?
I've actually been wondering about that because a lot of the artifacts actually held Elven lore to them.
Right.
So, for example, the sword that the fire mages get, that was held by King Anasterian Sunstrider, Kael'thas's dad.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Before that, and after that, Kael'thas wielded it until he faced off against Arthas. So at that point, you could do extra lore for Anasterian, because not a whole lot of people know about Anasterian Sunstrider, unless you know like Warcraft 1 and 2 lore. So you could go into him. You could obviously go into Thas'Dara, I think is what it is, the Legacy of the Windrunners, and go into that family line and be able to discover some of that, because we know the three sisters, there's a brother in there, believe it or not. We could explore him and be able to see, like, because I think he was one of the ones that wielded Thas'Dara. So you could go into that. And then, yeah, Xal'atath, as far as I'm concerned, is a little bit of an elven weapon, because of the fact that it was in Lordaeron when we found it. So at that point, you could easily tie Xal'atath into that. There's actually a lot of elven lore with those artifacts that I think you could get away with like new appearances.
So I wonder if they could do something where like the add quest to the remix, like I feel like all the weapons would be like the obvious way, but maybe that would be too much for them. But like add a quest chain for a lot of the weapons for maybe one for each class. So like, okay, let's add a new story to this remix to take like something a step further to set up things for whatever expansion they're going into.
How about a quest that unlocks during a patch, and if you've attended the remix for Legion, you get that flag, and then you're able to attend that in the real world?
I wonder if they would do that, because like that could like lock people out of it.
It depends, yeah.
Yeah, but like the artifacts in Legion and like the order halls, I'm always so sad that they like never did anything more with them. There's like expansion feature, but that was done, and that's been ever how many years ago?
They've been revisited, but very rarely.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the Priest Order Hall one got revisited in a lot of the Battle for Azeroth lore. So yeah, they incorporated some of them, but there are definitely ones like the Druid one has not been seen since it initially launched. Or yeah, it hasn't been seen in additional lore. I know the Hunter one has been seen. I don't think the Warrior one's been touched since then, which is kind of sad because Odin has played a role in future events. Not good roles, but he would be kind of a cool character to tie right back into. Right,
and just there's like so much that was built up there that I could feel like, especially if they're like tying all these other places like Quel'Thalas, Northrend, maybe they bring like these artifact weapons back and make them a focus, or
possibly
at least do something more to bring those stories forward.
It just depends on how much they actually want to do with Midnight. Like, a lot of people don't realize this. Quel'Thalas is a big area. Like, it's way bigger than anything that ever got explored in BC. So at that point, like they could easily make an expansion map out of the full breadth of Northern Lordaeron / Quel'Thalas and make it all work. And could I see them adding additional appearances? The other thing too is they don't necessarily need to be story related. Remember, there were secret appearances that you had to go around and do additional stuff for. For example, the Ashbringer had the secret storyline that if you wanted the evil looking Ashbringer, you had to go and do quests that were all based off of the weird rumors of how to unlock the Ashbringer in Classic. So
yeah,
you could do that stuff and be able to maybe unlock an appearance.
with like their hidden appearances,
Mhm.
like had some like obscure way to get them.
Yeah, something like that. Either that, or you could basically take those appearances and basically, incorporate them into the story and make it so that as soon as you hit this one point, you are good as gold. You can have this appearance from here on in. The only thing that's disappointing is that not everything is Elven lore. So at that point,
Right.
it would be cool is if you're going to do that with Midnight, you also did it with the Last Titan and all the Titan-based artifacts.
Oh yeah.
Because that would also be a cool thing. Okay, so now that I'm back here, there is actually something I was thinking about while we had to take a quick break. Monks got artifacts too, Rising Sun, and
Oh yes, they did.
and it would have been cool if Mop Remix actually incorporated, like, I don't know, a Shaw touched appearance for those
Ooh.
artifacts. Because remember, like when Mop started, we had the Shaw touched weapon that was part of the legendary quest line.
Oh yeah, we had like. I kind of thought that they like did not have the legendary quest. I mean, like I know why it wouldn't work, but there's
No,
also
they,
like a.
they actually did something better because I think it was either a toy or a cloak appearance that would do the enchantment kind of thing. So it would incorporate the cool thing that everybody liked from those cloaks. So you could have like the Jade Serpent stuff happen on your back kind of stuff.
So yes, that's true. But I was just thinking like the story implications of it, and like with Rathian, and like everything,
Yeah,
like
I don't know
what
if
he
you're
was
really
trying to
gonna
do.
that. And,
Yeah,
and I know that some people are screaming like, well, just wait until Mists of Pandaria Classic. Yes, but I mean, at that point, it's
but that's
kind of like you don't get to, even then, like,
it's
yes,
not
they're
the
gonna
same.
fast track everything, but you're still gonna have to go through a bunch of shit in order to be able to get it. So
Yeah,
that's
and
kind of
it's
one
like
of the downsides of those. I'm kind of glad we don't do legendaries like that anymore because it took forever to complete those damn things.
yeah, I kind of liked it as like a goal to like you're constantly aiming for,
Mhm. The
which I feel like it works, but it's also frustrating when it's like taking forever.
Yeah, the only time I actually got frustrated with it was because unfortunately the mop one I wasn't able to get. I was a couple of steps behind it. I had done like the Throne of Thunder stuff, but I hadn't done the final patch to be able to complete it because around that time I was neck deep in college assignments, so
Oh
I wasn't
yeah,
able to do that. But the thing that irritated me was when Warlords of Draenor came around and we were doing the legendary ring. Eventually, once people discovered what the pop effects were, it then became a priority to make sure that our first legendary ring in the raid team was a DPS one. And then like you had to have like your first 3 so that you would have that DPS pop because it was so great. And that irritated me because it's just like, but the healers and the tanks are working their butts off too.
I thought it was like an individual quest that you didn't like.
It's an individual quest, but the way that it worked is that if everybody had that legendary ring and somebody activated it activated for everybody.
Yeah,
So
it
like if I
did.
had the tank ring of that equivalent and the DPS ring was popped, then I would get the tank benefit, but I'd also get the damage explosion that happened with the DPS ring. And that's why
Okay,
it
guess
became
I'm.
like a raid priority to have the DPS ring.
Oh, so they wanted you'd have the DPS ring to help the DPS, so you might not get the tank benefit.
Yes, and then at that point, like when your first 3 had it, then you had like a priority order. This person pops it at the first attempt. This person pops it at the second attempt because it was like a big cooldown. It was
Yeah,
all kinds of stupid, and that's the only time where I thought that was poorly implemented. Um, and it's enough to a point where I'm kind of glad that we don't have legendary quest lines anymore because the requirements of a lot of those were kind of outrageous.
yeah.
But
I'm
but yeah,
I'd
I
be
was thinking
okay.
about that. It would have been cool to have like Shaw touched appearances for the monks, or like I said, the Last Titan. We have Titan based ones. We could easily do stories for that. Um, I don't want the artifact appearances to be gone as Blizzard keeps kind of treating them. Instead, let's find, like, I get it. You don't want to have to incorporate artifacts, but incorporate artifact appearances.
And
There's no
especially
problem there.
if they do a Legion time running, which I feel like it would not surprise me at all if they do that.
Yeah.
But that's an easy way to like, okay, we'll give you something new to go after with
especially
this.
with a lot of the class-based lore. People would love it.
Yeah.
Because like
It's just
at
the
that
question
point,
is like,
one of the things I know a lot of people have said, like, we really want those Legion sets because they were really cool. But, you know, you had all of the stupid bullshit of, you know, stuff like I've complained about where you can only get the wrist piece from the, not Aberrus, but the Antorus raid, and it's a trash drop and stuff like that. Wouldn't it be cool if you could just get the whole ensemble and then you don't have to worry about it?
Yeah, throw some bronze at her or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my deal with it. But it also would be kind of cool is like I was saying, if they find a way to be able to have the, you know, because all of it's tied to the bronze dragonflight, right? So at that point you do the remix. So this would encourage people to do the remixes, and then all of a sudden, boom, portal out of nowhere. Chromie's like, hey, you have additional stuff that you can do at this area, and it would flesh out lore. Maybe not current lore, but maybe old school lore. That maybe you didn't know. You know, for example, I brought up the fire mage artifact, which was wielded by the first Elven King of Quel'Thalas. Wouldn't it be cool to be able to see lore based around him?
Yeah, like,
and you could
learn a bit more about him, especially if he's like, if that's tying into everything else with the elves.
Right. Because at that point, like, Anasterion was at the War of the Ancients. Wouldn't it be cool to be able to get kind of his take on the aftermath of it? And get to see him calling Illidan a horrible bastard. Stuff like that. I think they could easily incorporate it. But unfortunately, we do need to move things along, and I think this is actually appropriate because we have talked about Midnight quite a bit. We also had additional story that unlocked, and this is basically the pre-setup for War Within, to which we got the Dark Heart. Now, for those who don't know, the Dark Heart has been set up as the artifact that Iridikron got from Aberrus. And it's supposed to be like this weird other kind of dragon soul where he's been incorporating void energies into it, or at least some kind of energy into it. Specifically from the Dawn, or what is it? Not Dawn of the Infinite. I was going to say Dawn of the Aspects. That's not right. Dawn of the Infinite dungeon, where he was able to get that energy. And obviously we know from the end cinematic for Dragonflight, he has since handed that over to Xal'atath. So now we have to kind of set up how we start into this whole War Within expansion. And the way that they did it was kind of cool by basically sending Illyria on a set of quests that ultimately kind of get her to try to discover who this Harbinger is, and at the end finding out, you know, what we already know, that it is Xal'atath. And by also, you know, I just mentioned Locust Walker. We haven't seen him since Legion. They brought him back in a cinematic to basically say, oh yeah, by the way, this Harbinger is obviously the Xal'atath that you're talking about. And basically kind of hinting that, okay, Locust is probably going to have a bigger involvement in probably the next two expansions, especially since it ties into his homeworld of, I believe it's called Koresh. The destruction of his homeworld Koresh by Dimensius the All-Devouring. So we got to have that kind of cool discovery. But first of all, what did you think of the Dark Heart cinematics?
So I thought it was interesting. There's a lot that I feel like doesn't fully make sense yet, which is intentional. But like, there's been this radiant song throughout Azeroth, like people hearing it, seeing visions, hearing voices. We saw that like with the fourth and cinematic with like Anduin and Thrall.
Mm-hmm. But they didn't name it at that point. I think Metzen referred to it as a radiant song, but he didn't call it the radiant song. So I like the fact that it became the title of it.
Yeah, so like, but that is what it's called by Khadgar, I think it was, or whoever else said it.
That's what they're referring to it as.
But how that is like a beckoning to a Void Lord somehow, which is really weird. Like, it doesn't like seem like it's like really a scary voice. It's like, it's implied that Azeroth is like asking for help.
Yeah.
So how does that mean that a Void Lord would be coming? Like, there's a disconnect here and we don't have all the answers yet. So
yeah, it ties into, because it could be Azeroth that's talking to us, but a lot of the speculation that's been happening from people like Taliesin and Evitel, and I think even Nobble has kind of bounced into this, is that it easily could be Xalatath talking to us, and we don't necessarily know. Which would be kind of a cool 50-50 thing to do, although I tend to be on the side that it is actually Azeroth reaching out to us.
Yeah, and I guess the question would be like, why would, if it is Xalatath, why would she be reaching out to us in this way? Is she like trying to get some people on her side without them knowing what they're doing?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't seem like the way the Void would work, because it seems like the goal of the Void is like make people go insane, like by showing them like
that was the goal of the old gods. We don't necessarily know what the motivations of the Void are, because the motivations of the Void have only ever been touched on in Legion with Locust Walker, and maybe a little bit here and there in various other expansions, but basically a lot of stuff that gets attributed to the old gods also gets attributed to the Void, and we don't necessarily know that.
Yeah, so maybe that, yeah, like all we have to go is mainly the old gods, so yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe there's something different here.
Because here's the thing is, like, Metzen even said it in his unveil of the World Soul Saga, is that Xalatath's goal is to establish a new Black Empire. So at that point, the way that I kind of interpreted that is a Black Empire with her at the helm. And so maybe that's what the Void Lords have promised her, is if you go through all this extra effort, you collect the blood of the old gods, you get to rule it, because why not? You know, like eventually we'll you know, we're supposed to be this vast maw that is ever hungering. We'll get around to eating you too, but sure, you can have your fun for a millennia or two.
Yeah, and like you go back to what Khadgar was saying at the end of the quest line, as the Wowhead article pulled up since I was trying to remember what had happened. It's like maybe it's a warning from the World Soul, and maybe it has something to do with Xalatath. Probably has something to do with her either directly or indirectly.
Well, and I also like that Khadgar questions it, because remember, even though it's not officially confirmed, everybody's pretty much assuming he is the guardian of Azeroth. So at that point, he is what Medivh used to be. So at that point, when he hears a Radiant song, his goal as a mage isn't necessarily to just believe it like a priest would. It is to question it.
Yeah, like he doesn't know, so there's this mystery.
That's why, like, one of the things I like about the Dragonflight expansion is that, look, Kalecgos and Khadgar are friends, but he wanted Kalecgos to explain what is going on. And then at that point, he can kind of determine, all right, grab my staff, let's go, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because that's what the Guardian is supposed to be. It's supposed to be this kind of mediator determining whether or not the arcane elements should go and help, kind of thing. So I like the fact that they kept him in that regard. I will tell you one thing I have an issue with, and that is how it's perceived, or at least how everybody perceives Illyria. Because they did this back in Legion, when they reintroduced Illyria and tried to explain why she wasn't really on good terms with the Light, because she was heavily associated with the Void. But then we're completely forgetting that BFA happened, and the Alliance were totally embracing Void powers in order to be able to get people into specific areas for the war campaign and whatnot. I don't know if you remember this, but Magister Umbric, Rising Sun, was a big part of the Void Elves, and he was one of the big war campaign characters that we would follow. And we were totally fine with hanging out with this Void Elf dude, but then we have the cutscene where Khadgar's not sure if he should trust his friend Illyria. What? Did I miss a step here?
Well, I guess Khadgar's not necessarily Alliance, though.
No, he's neutral, but the reason that he's fearing her is because of her Void powers. And even I would think Khadgar would be wise enough to be able to look at her and go, yeah, it looks like her powers are in check. So at that point, she is my friend Illyria. I shouldn't have to be wary around her. And in fact, I think they also it's been a while since I did Darkheart, but I think they also kind of tie in that Turalyon doesn't really trust his wife, Illyria.
Well, no, it wasn't Turalyon. It was like the image that they were showing was of Turalyon not trusting her. but I don't think that wasn't the real Terralian.
Okay, if that's the case, I'm on board with it, because this is one thing that I really don't want to see Blizzard go down the path of. Is they've since confirmed Illyria and Terralian are married, and
Right.
obviously they have a son, which you can go and visit in Outland now.
Okay.
I don't want them to tear apart marriages in order to make a story work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't care that one is in the light and one is in the dark. Love finds a way, people, okay?
Yeah. So I think what was happening there, like they didn't really explain it, but
Yeah.
I think it was one of the Bellier videos a while back. He made a comment like the old gods, like they can see into the future, but they see every possible future. They just don't know which one is true.
Yeah, and some things like that have been stated of the GNRO as well.
Yeah.
Which is why in a lot of cases I kind of wonder if in The Last Titan we're going to learn that, like, much like in the StarCraft universe where the Protoss called themselves the Firstborn, we're going to find out the GNRO are the Firstborn, and they are the first entities of light and void, which to me would be very interesting because of that light and void cycle that they go through. So,
yeah,
I like that concept, and I'd be totally on board with that kind of a revelation. I was just getting worried because, look, I get it in the horrific visions of Stormwind, Illyria is the enemy. And that's totally fine. That's the way that N'Zoth would totally paint that. He'd take the most untrustworthy ally and turn them against you, kind of thing. If it wasn't Illyria, it would have been Jaina.
Yeah, and well, this ties back to the thing about like with the old gods being like see the future but not knowing which one.
Right.
So it's like they're taking here is one possible future and like showing that to them. So it's like twisting this isn't reality, but it's another one that could have happened.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they're showing with Illyria here is like showing her what could have happened.
Yeah,
and, like,
I just don't want to see, like, you know, because remember we were mentioning like Anduin is going to be somebody that we follow along with Thrall. You know, those are supposed to be kind of our alliance and horde counterparts. But as Metzen pointed out, Illyria is going to be a big part of this too because of her connect. They basically are kind of hinting at this connection to Xalatath, that she is going to want to fight that, especially with now her new Void Hunter abilities. And I don't want it to just be like, oh, well, we shouldn't trust you, Illyria, when it's very clear, like, when we go to the Isle of Dor, we have to trust her.
Right.
We have to be able to know she has our back. Otherwise, there's no point in pushing her. You might as well push somebody else.
Yeah, and though Lotus Walker made a point at the end of the cinematic saying that Illyria was unbalanced because of what she had seen.
Yes. Well,
so
and he also was kind of alluding to the fact that she's unbalanced because she has ties. And so at that point, like, this is the one thing that you're not supposed to like about Locust Walker, is he doesn't really have ties to anything. He's tied in neutrality, and that's why he works so well with the Void. And so you have that element of like, yes, Illyria isn't 100% tying into her Void powers, but his argument is because she still has ties that keep her bound to her past that she needs to let go of.
Which makes me wonder, like, why does he not have ties, or why is he so like against them? I'm wondering if it is the ties that led to the Void Lord destroying his world.
My guess is that his ties are probably already dead because, like, again, Dimensius destroyed Karash. There's not many ethereals around anymore. And even then, he was like part of this isolated kind of coven of them. So at that point, it could entirely be that all of his ties are dead.
Well, yes.
But it also could be
I'm looking at it
because of his vengeance towards the people who destroyed his world, that he's lost those ties. He doesn't see reasons to have those ties.
Yeah, so that's like probably the way that would make the more sense is like Dimensius has lost so much, he doesn't want that same loss to happen to Illyria or other people.
And I think it would be better for Illyria to basically say, yes, I get what you're saying, but I can also keep my ties to the past and be able to control things as well, kind of thing. Hence why I actually like the new look for her, where it's kind of got like that void kind of grasping into her, but she still has the light aspects of her. So that'll be a cool thing. The only thing I don't like is that I don't think I need to bring a picture of this, but I don't know if you've noticed this, but her facial model is permanently in what I like to call a resting bitch face, and I'm not too happy about that. Instead, I'd rather have old Illyria back.
Yeah, I haven't noticed that.
Yeah,
but
I don't know why, but modern AAA gaming has just decided that stoic women all have resting bitch face, and they don't have to have that, Blizzard. Samus Aran has never had that. I don't think you have to have this with your character.
well, she doesn't show her face that often either.
Well, she might have to, because now she doesn't really have a hood anymore.
All right. Yeah, I haven't kept up with that one.
So yeah,
but that's a topic for a different podcast.
But I love, so overall, I do like what they did with Darkheart, and basically trying to tie it into other lore, because how many people actually know about Dimensius? It was way back in the first expansion. So at that point, you can now have Locust Walker kind of tie back into that and get people to explore it. So that at that point, okay, now we can kind of build it, and we have a feeling, or I've had a feeling for a while, we're going to see Dimensius again, because I'm pretty sure that Void Wards work the same way as demons, or as far as I'm concerned, old gods do, which is like, you kill them, they go back to the ether and basically restore themselves. And
so you can't get rid of them for good. Yeah, because maybe Dimensius is like one of the bosses of War Within or Midnight.
Well, you can get rid of them, but they have to die in the ether, as close to the ether as they possibly can be.
Right.
And so at that point, like, that's the whole premise of this, is that we have to get them close to the ether in order to properly kill them. That's why it hasn't worked before. Hence why, when Legion came around, so many generals came back that we know we've killed, is because they basically reconstructed themselves in the void. So yeah, that's primarily the reason for it. So yeah, we went into the Darkheart, and technically this is the point where the Legion or the War Within Alpha dropped. But before we get into that, I did actually want to get into this, because we can talk about it without having to go into details of the War Within. And that is, we once again have a roadmap, Rising Sun. And that is...
Yay, roadmaps.
Yay, roadmaps. So basically, the alpha had launched at this point, and then we basically had a roadmap going into the beta, which is now, like, as of recording this, the beta is live. And then eventually we got all of the other aspects of it, which, first of all, early access. We officially got the launch date of August 26th, and early access would begin on the 22nd. So you basically, if you bought the War Within Epic Edition, not only did you get the beta access, but you would get 4 days ahead of everybody else in order to be able to get your character up to 80 and start up on the end game. And I have to ask this, when it comes, like, where are you at in terms of early access? Like, is 4 days enough to justify it as a perk to you?
Well, I was mad that they're even doing early access they had to pay for, so I have not bought the expansion at all, and I won't until right as it comes out.
Okay, yeah, because here's the thing, is like, I don't have a problem if you want to give people early access, but I think Legion did it better, because what they basically did was they allowed for the Demon Hunter starting zone to be accessed, I think it was like a week before Legion officially launched.
Right.
And that seems better to me. I think even Dragonflight did that, where they allowed for the Drakthir starting zone to be accessed a week before that. And 4 days just doesn't seem to be a lot to me.
Well, I feel like it's a different purpose, though. Like with the Demon Hunters, that was like to get up to the level cap of the previous expansion, like whatever Draenor got us to, 100, I think.
True.
So, like, you did the Legion starting zone, you got to level 100, you go get gear or whatever. Like, I raided with my Demon Hunter for, like, the last week of doing the Draenor raid.
And considering that it's part of the Epic Edition as well, the beta does kind of justify it a little bit more. It's weird to me when you do early access and it's, like, a couple of days before the launch, because that just doesn't seem to me like a whole lot to justify the extra price tag that the Epic Edition would entail. But I guess the beta access kind of justifies that.
Yeah, I also don't really care about the beta because, like, I want to play the game itself. It's like I might like run a few dungeons, like get a feel for the class. but I can also do that in the pre-patch with most of the stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, I pre-ordered, but I didn't get the Epic Edition. I can tell you that much. I got the step below it because as far as what I cared about, I didn't necessarily need beta access. I was okay with a lot of the aesthetics that came with it, and so at that point, I was willing to do that. But the Epic Edition, yeah, it's just not my thing. But then August 26th is when we get the launch, and when people can officially start exploring the Isle of Dor and going into the core of Azeroth. And then finally, on September 10th, which is roughly a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks after that, that is when Season 1 will officially start for War Within. And that is when the Ajkahet, or I can't remember what it's called, but the Ajkahet Heart of Narobar, I think is what it's going to be called. The first raid is going to be launched, as well as the first season of Mythic Plus, which, by the way, we did actually get Season 1's details for it. Give me a second and I can bring that up too.
So I just realized something. I have a work trip like the week after the expansion comes out, so I'm not going to be able to play then unless I don't go on this trip. Which
you gotta work, right? They just don't understand, man. Jiminy Christmas! I thought I had this prepped, but yeah. See, here we go. Season 1 dungeons for Mythic Plus. So we have other stuff to talk about here, but really quick. So here's how it is going to go. So the brand new dungeons of the Mythic Plus dungeon pool. They are basically doing the exact same thing they did with Dragonflight. They are cutting it in half and only allowing for half of those dungeons to be allowed in Mythic Plus, primarily because they actually are working on the balancing for those right now in the beta. And specifically the ones they're working for are Atakata, the City of Echoes, the City of Threads, the Stone Vault, and the Dawnbreaker. Those are the 4 dungeons from War Within that will be in Season 1. And here's where it gets fun, because the previous expansion dungeons we get Mists of Tyr-Scythe. No! Shadowlands is back! No! Especially not that one. Oh, I hated trying to do Mythic Plus on that one, especially for somebody who didn't know where they were going in Mists.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it's okay, because we're also going to get another Shadowlands dungeon. No! But it's the Necrotic Wake, so everybody knows where to go for that.
Actually, get lost there.
Yeah, Necrotic Wake's not that hard to get lost in. It's just Mists. Like, we could have picked another one. Like, you could have picked the other side. At least people know where they're going in that one.
Yeah, that one I liked.
Yeah, that's my primary complaint. Is like with Mists of Tyr-Scythe, it's just difficult to navigate, especially for some of us who like have to take breaks, and they're just like, oh, where the fuck do I go in here? Can I just skip to the next boss? Because I know how to do the patty cake bullshit.
There you go.
Exactly. So we have Mists of Tyr-Scythe, we have the Necrotic Wake, we have a returning BFA dungeon with Siege of Borealis, which I find funny because this was the Alliance-only one that they got. I mean, technically the Horde could access it too, but this was the Horde, or the Alliance-based Mythic dungeon that we got.
Like the Alliance story-based,
yeah. The Alliance story-based one, whereas the Horde one was... Oh, crap, I can never remember its name, but it was tied into the first ever king of Zuldazar. But yeah, so you have Siege of Borealis, and then coming back from the Cataclysm expansion, Grimbatal. No, not Grimbatal!
That one brings back memories.
Oh, God, no! Even in Time Walking, people don't understand how the dragons work.
You just like attack all the things and you kill them and then you just walk through the dungeon, sort of.
I already know that it's going to be such a pain to try and get people to do these things and do them right. It's not even fair. But yeah, so we're going to get 4 dungeons. Again, I like this concept. They take 4 of those dungeons from War Within that people can get familiar with, and then they also bring in these previous expansion dungeons that we're well aware with, and we can run them, you know, on the back of our hand to be able to at least have some kind of advantage. So
yeah,
I do like that concept.
I think we talked about this before. Like, I like that they're leveraging all the content they've made over the years, instead of just like letting everything, like they have like nearly 20 years worth of content now,
right?
Just like sitting there. So, well, use it. They're good dungeons. Absolutely. So why not bring them back in from time to time.
Absolutely. The only thing that's kind of irritating to me is as far back as they're going right now is Kata, and I would love to be able to see them go back to like. Now, granted, if you want lore reasons to do it, that's totally fine. But bring back some of those Wrath dungeons, bring back some of those Burning Crusade dungeons, and put them in the Mythic Plus pool, and just see what people do. Because I'm pretty sure you could rebalance those things and be able to make them work in a Mythic Plus environment.
Yeah, maybe tune them up a bit. Might take a little bit of work, especially if there's a reason it would tie into the story. I feel like these don't really like tie into the story of War Within, though I also don't know much about the details of it, so maybe they do.
We won't know that until we actually get into the dungeons, and then maybe we can kind of piece together lore, because I can tell you that the City of Threads and Atakata are both based in the Nerubar portion, so the end. But the Stone Vault, I think, is in the Ringing Depths, and the Dawnbreaker makes me think that it's in Hollowfall. So not sure how those tie in. But if I remember correctly, Dragonflight Season 1, they basically just kind of took the 4 dungeons that were done and that were properly balanced, and those were Season 1. And then they just worked on the other ones in the meantime. So that could be
the others
here as well.
Yeah, and if the others aren't balanced well yet, well, it's only up to like Heroic, maybe Mythic 0, I'm not sure, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of happy about this. And actually, I think this is an appropriate time to bring this up. One of the things I've heard from both the alpha and the beta is there's going to be a new approach when it comes to the War Within dungeons. So you remember how we integrated those follower dungeons, right, in Dragonflight?
Oh, yeah.
So apparently, the way that they've been doing it in the alpha and more in the beta is your first exposure to that dungeon is a follower dungeon. And so at that point, you can go and do your sightseeing and all that stuff in that first run, and you can get to see how the bosses work. And then from there on in, if you want to go and do a follower dungeon again, you could do that, or you could step right into Mythic Plus.
So
I personally think that's a great idea.
So I like the idea of it, but I'm also worried that it might be too slow to be fun. So like going back to Final Fantasy, like Final Fantasy, I've been going through Shadowbringers, or I did a follower dungeon for the one because I thought, well, it'll be good to see these characters that have lore reasons to be there, their reactions. But I felt like stuff was taking so long to die, it was just a slog to get through.
So just with my exposure to the follower dungeons in Dragonflight, it didn't really seem like things took forever to die, but the AI didn't necessarily know where to go a lot of the time. Specifically in Ruby life pools, like my tank took forever to continue things on. I had to start, like it's supposed to just be kind of on an autopilot. I had to keep pressing the button to tell them to go.
Okay.
So that was kind of annoying to me. But from people that I've talked to who have done this in the beta, they have said that it's a pretty straightforward deal. So like the AI knows what they're doing, and they've already got their dungeon run or their dungeon route kind of mapped out. And it's actually a pretty fast run. It's about, I think when somebody told me the time of it, it was like 25, 30 minutes.
Okay, yeah, that can be reasonable then.
Yeah, that's not horrible. But I do like that concept because it allows for people to be able, like if you're brand spanking new, you can learn the dungeon and then get the story kind of out of the way, because that's probably going to be the time to do your story quest.
Right, then you can rush through it, but not feel like you're missing stuff the next time you go through.
And at that point, it's like, well, I already know the bosses, so now I can go in with other people and be able to do them the way I want to.
Right.
Which is, as far as I'm concerned, the way that it probably should go. So if that's what they're going for, awesome. I like what they're doing. If it turns out to be worse than that, like kind of what we're talking about, could blow up in their face.
Yeah, so we'll see. But I'm not opposed to the idea. I'm just like, I've seen it done not well before, so hopefully it will be good here.
Right. And I think it's only appropriate at this point to get into what we have learned so far in the alpha and also to some extent in the beta. And so I was just barely bringing up the dungeons. The other controversial decision that even now some people are not sure if they're on board with, there is talk that when the Nerubar Palace, that's what the raid is called, when that when it actually goes into place, Blizzard has confirmed that there will be the usual difficulties that people are used to, But now there will also be a story difficulty. And what this story difficulty is basically, it's a story mode for the raid that can be run for 1 to 5 players, which is what I'm guessing is going to replace the overall raid quest that everybody has to do to go kill the final boss. You go do it this way. It will have a reduced difficulty. I've even heard that I don't think it's going to be the case for the Narubar Palace, but they have said in like future patches, it might not include every single boss in there and might be a little bit more focused towards the ones that do matter to the story.
Yeah, because it looks like for this one, it'll only be the final boss.
Yes, it's going to be the story mode of the final wing of LFR because that's going to be where it's lore relevant. And they've even said in future patches, it might just be that you only take on, like if a raid has 8 bosses, you might only take on 3 of them because 3 of them only have like that lore significance. The others are just raid bosses for the sake of raid bosses.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of the raids, story-wise, a lot of the bosses are fillers. Like, yes, they might have like a quest or 2 or whatever, but they don't matter.
So how do you feel about this? Basically, you get access to the final wing of LFR to go complete your raid quest so you can get the necessary currency or gear, whatever you're going to get from it. But it's not necessarily the full raid, and you're only running it with like 1 to 5 players. Is this going to be something you want to look into?
I mean, so raiding is like what I focus on in WoW.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time this comes out, I probably already beat it on normal.
Probably.
Yeah, or at least I'm getting close to it. And
because the way that I understand it is like they're not going to tier things. So like you get access to everything except for Mythic in that first week. So at that point, I'm guessing the story mode would be available maybe before LFR?
No, it says the current plan is to release story mode with the final wing of LFR.
My bad, yeah.
The article you linked said that. So
I completely missed the fine print there. So
okay. Yeah, so in that case, it might be like, well, I need this quest for whatever item it is. I might be like, okay, I'll just like jump in here and do it. And if I'm like taking a while to see the final boss, I might like do that just so I can like see the story and don't need to worry about waiting as we're like distributing loot or whatever.
Right.
So I'm not interested in this personally, but I don't dislike the idea of it existing.
See, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's just like, okay, for casual players where everything is kind of more solo oriented, I don't hate this concept because it would actually be kind of cool to like bring you and Brinton and we just go through Narubar Palace and experience the story and then, sit back and talk about it. But is this how I would want to experience the raid every time? No, I wouldn't. I would want the full raid experience because, like I said earlier in this podcast, raiding in dungeons is really where the final polish of an expansion goes, as far as I'm concerned for Blizzard. So I would really want that full experience at some point.
Yeah, and I feel like the experience of raiding is more than just like seeing the story. Like that's a piece of it, but I feel like that's a very minor piece versus like the gameplay.
Yeah, the other element is like most of the time I'm doing like normal to heroic raiding. The other experience is all of the other people on Discord or Vent with you going through and being able to celebrate in those victories.
And like working together to overcome this challenge. While story mode, it's like there might be a couple of mechanics, but it's not going to be a challenge for you.
Yeah, like I look at that and go, this would be really cool to sit back and do with like you and Brinton and maybe some other people, but it's not how I would want to experience it every single time. I would definitely want to do like the LFR version just to see the whole thing.
Yeah, and like if Brinton, like he's super busy with school and everything, so maybe he just like wants to like do the story through the questing, then like join us for this so he can like see the story of the raid.
Because like this is one of the things we've talked about is like going and doing dungeon runs together and just bullshitting and recording it kind of thing.
Right.
And that might be cool to do is like in Narubar Palace, we bring him in because he's too busy with school and he can go and experience the lore with us. That would be cool. But it's definitely one of those times where, like, if we could get him into a 10-man or an LFR, let's do it just because it would be fun. It would be the raiding experience to me.
It could also be too, like with LFR, if you like can't tank or heal, you might have really long queues to get into it.
That's the other thing that benefits this, is that if you have a server that has like specifically weird queues for DPS or healers, or even for tanks, this is probably the way to.
Yeah, and like if you only have like half an hour, be like, okay, I'll jump on and see the raid. Well, you don't want a half an hour queue to do that, so.
And this is a cool, unique storytelling opportunity as far as I'm concerned, because one of the things I liked from Dragonflight is they involved the raid post killing the final boss in Aberrus.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if they did that for Amir Drasil, but they definitely did it for Aberrus. And
yeah, like we went back there a couple different times.
Yeah, I like the fact that we did, and it was part of the Zaralek Caverns story achievement, is that you had to go and do all these post quests to kind of clean up the remaining areas, and maybe even kind of look for traces of void energies and whatnot. And ultimately, you got the payoff of being able to see who gets picked as the new Black Dragonflight, or the Black Dragon aspect. I want more of this, damn it. This was actually really cool to do.
Yeah, it makes the world feel richer. And like,
yes.
One of my favorite things is when they like reuse a zone that they've had before, either like a previous expansion or like going back to the raid and doing something else with that area.
Well, and most importantly, like, you kind of know this because you've done raiding. You don't get to look around when your raid is going through, because, you know, chop, everybody's only got 3 hours. So you don't get to look at like the detail that goes into places like Narubar Palace or Aberrus. This is the way that you get to do that.
It can also let them tell a story in the raid setting wise that doesn't have to be part of the raid itself.
I mean, we just barely brought this up with artifact appearances. Wouldn't it be cool if one of those artifact appearances, you had to go into the raid to go get it?
Oh yeah.
That'd be cool.
Or like you have to like beat a boss that was there, like trying to scavenge along with you, and like you learn more about like what was really valuable here. Get a few quests that just would not fit within the story of a raid,
and
but you can still explore.
One of the things I've heard they've learned from Delves quite a bit too is like, we can incorporate these dungeons and instanced content and have it continue to tell story. We don't just have to, you know, design it for everybody to go raffle stomp their way through. We can actually do additional stuff with it. Which to me, that's always been something that's missing out of it. I don't think, you know, raid dungeons were really ever explored post content until like Legion, when we got to be Illidan in the raid boss fight, you know?
Oh yeah.
That's it. And we never really touched any of that stuff. And that was such a refreshing experience to go through Aberrus and be able to see like all of the cool shit that maybe you missed when you were running your way through.
Yeah, and like Aberrus, like the story there is probably my favorite story of any of the raids I've seen.
Yes, no, that's why I'm wondering.
Probably steps there.
That's why I'm wondering if Amir Drasil did anything, or even if Vault of the Incarnates did it, because I don't think Vault did.
No, and I don't think Amir Drasil did. I think it's also like situational, like what makes sense for it. Because like Aberrus, like there's all that history with Deathwing and like Rathia and Sibelian, like tying that story and really made sense there. Vault of the Incarnates is more like, well, that's where the Incarnates were, but that's about it. And I think that's also okay. They shouldn't force it, but they should use the resources they have to like really flesh it out if it makes sense.
Right, and I don't think they truly realized that until Aberrus. And so at that point, the fact that they've learned that lesson, please do more of that, because some of these dungeons, they never get touched after that, unless, you know, you're a transmog whore like me and you run them all the time and just notice little details as you're going through. So yeah, the story mode I think will be an interesting addition. I can already tell you the more hardcore audience that still does exist with WoW, they're not on board, but they weren't going to be on board to begin with. And so at that point, I mean, if you really want a hardcore environment, it exists for you. And if you're not getting it here, then you can get it somewhere else. That's ultimately kind of my viewpoint when it comes to that. So we have that. The other interesting thing that kind of came out of the alpha was we might have learned about the next allied race that is going to be available after the Earthen. Specifically,
okay. Yeah, you sent me that. I need to find the correct link, so give me a minute.
So
Okay, there it is.
it's okay. There's not a whole lot known yet because obviously, we're trying to keep a lot of the story away from us. But the new race is called the Heronir. And this is the way that a lot of people have described it to me. I don't even know if it actually fits the description because they basically said it's humans meets trolls meets elves. And there's obviously a lot more to it than that when I look at the model.
Yeah.
It definitely looks like there's a lot more elements here. There's a lot of Nightborn-esque stuff. There's a lot of Volpera.
Like a mix of like lots of different things.
There's even Venthyr. Like they have Venthyr fangs. So at that point, like there's
like,
definitely more here that we don't know. And to my knowledge, I don't even know where we first encounter these Heronir. I'm guaranteeing you it's not with the Nerubians because they probably wouldn't have survived. But maybe in the Ringing Depths is when we access these?
I have no idea who they are, which I also don't keep up with the story, so that I could be missing stuff.
Yeah, but this potentially could be because they've actually noticed through data mining that there are different styles and different like hairstyles and body types and things like that that can be used with the Heronir. And technically, a lot of that could be used for randomizing NPCs, but there's apparently enough that they probably could justify it being an allied race. Now, would it tie to a faction? I honestly don't think it would. I think this would be another neutral allied race.
And the Earthen don't tie to a faction, do they?
No, they're the first neutral allied race. That's why I'm saying maybe they would go with that again with this one.
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm very interested. I'm not sure about class yet because I'm not even touching that yet. Like I can already look at this and go, well, I mean, there are a couple of classes that obviously fit. I mean, obviously warrior fits. We even have a Heronir armor set on here, which does look kind of cool. It actually kind of has a Mantid kind of feel to it, like a buggy kind of look. So maybe that's what we could get out of it. But ultimately, we won't know until we actually get in there. And you can even see some of the various customizations that they have. And it is a lot of options. So it's possible.
It reminds me of how during Battle for Azeroth, like people it looked like Volpera would be an allied race, but that wasn't until like the final patch.
Well, yeah, because originally I think they were teasing that Volpera were going to be the Alliance race.
I don't think it was that, but it was like they like had like the same skeleton as a goblin. There's like lots of customization.
Well, that's why they were the Alliance race. Is because they had the goblin skeleton. So at that point,
they thought there'd be
the whole purpose of the allied races was to give everybody unique skeletons, right? But then eventually they decided that Volpera really should be on the Horde side, and that's why we got Mecha Gnomes.
Right.
And so at that point, like, yeah, it's definitely, it has the startings of like what the Volpera did. Not too many customizations, but enough to randomize and be able to get NPCs.
Yeah, because it looks like the body has like 10 different options you can swap between. I don't know like how many options there are for each one of those things.
This isn't even fur. This is quills. Okay, that makes it even more interesting. So
like lots of different hairstyles and all of that.
Yeah, so like when you go further into the customizations, I thought it was fur that was on their legs and stuff like that. They're actually quills. So
it looks like there's also fur there. Like fur is one of the options.
Yeah, but there's quills like intermixed in it.
So that too.
Okay.
So there's like a ton of detail for them.
That's interesting. And I can see where they have the troll customizations, but then you also have like Venthyr fangs that could easily come out of these guys too. I guess my first question is, what do we think the likeliness of this as being the next allied race for War Within?
73%.
I think it's likely, but we would definitely need to see more customizations to confirm it for certain, because there's just enough here to randomize. So at that point, like they could easily just be NPCs, and I'm really holding out hope that we get the evolved Nerubians at some point, but they've already decided that those are not going to happen, because it would have been cool to get an allied race that had multiple arms and maybe even multiple legs out of it. You know, for how many years have people been screaming for a Naga race, and you finally had a skeleton that might experiment with that, and they didn't ultimately do it. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's also interesting, like, to have a race where we know like nothing about them, but coming with all these customizations right away.
That's more importantly what I like out of this, is that this is a very unfamiliar race. It's tied to the current content, and so at that point it encourages players to learn more about it and see whether or not there's enough here to tie it as an allied race, and see whether or not, you know, the Heronir would have a vested interest in siding with either the Alliance or the Horde in their struggles. And we don't know that, but maybe the story would help elaborate on that particular aspect of their of who they are. Don't know, and we won't know until we actually get in there. But overall, it's very likely there's a lot of potential here, and I think I'd even mess around with it just a little bit, just because it'd be something new.
I'll play one, sure.
I would be more worried that this is probably going to be the race that gets druids, and so everybody's going to want cute and cuddly teddy bears, and I never want cute and cuddly teddy bear forms for druids. Make them nasty, make them badass. And if this thing's got quills, I want bear forms with frickin' quills in them.
Okay, now I want to play my druid.
So that's just me, though. So yeah, we have the Heronir. We obviously have some of the classes that were unveiled, and I don't necessarily want to go into that because everybody can go look that up. Like, Preach has pretty comprehensive videos on a lot of the effects that are being brought into it. But we also do have another quick update to go into with the alpha, and it's going to be more into the beta because they're actually going to test this in the beta. But it looks like we now know what the new affixes for Mythic Plus are going to be. And I'm already worried because a lot of them seem to me like a bit of a mess when it comes to people min-maxing. And I'm always worried about that with Mythic Plus, is that you're going to get that one group lead who just wants to get like this one particular achievement that can only be done with this particular mix-up or this makeup. It's not good. But let me go into these really quick. So these are supposed to be middle affixes, so they would be happening at the +5 era. And so we have the first one, which is Breathless. This would be non-boss enemies without mana ignore 20% armor with their attacks, but their armor is reduced by 30%, and they take 10% increased arcane damage. See if you guys start to notice a pattern here. The next one is Thorned. Non-boss enemies without mana inflict physical damage to their attackers when attacked, but take 10% increased holy and shadow damage. Third one is Attuned. Non-boss enemies with mana inflict 20% increased magic damage, but take 10% increased nature damage and 30% increased damage from bleed effects. And then finally, we have Focused. Non-boss enemies with mana have 30% increased haste, but take 10% increased frost and fire damage. Have people started to notice why I have a little bit of concern with this?
So you're saying we should all play Demon Hunters because they do lots of chaos damage, which is everything.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. I want nothing but 5-man Demon Hunter parties on those particular weeks. Now, the problem that I have is that I can honestly see people doing this where, okay, we have the increased arcane damage. Now we're going to find every single class that can do arcane damage. So, for example, your tank has to be the balance Guardian variant, so that they do arcane damage with their basic attacks. You have to have an arcane mage, obviously. You have to have I can't remember which hunter variant, but they do a lot of arcane damage because they're mixed into marksmanship. So you'll have that, and those will be the people that get any work done in Mythic Plus that given week. And then Thorn will roll around, and it'll only be the holy and shadow-based ones. And that'll be very difficult, especially for some of us that don't necessarily mesh with that particular affix.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting idea to like let certain classes and specs stand out in different weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So it reminds me a little bit about what they did in Shadowlands, where each like dungeon had a thing a certain covenant can do to help out, like to make some aspect of it easier. And I like that just because it lets you be like, oh, I'm this covenant, I can help out in this dungeon. And I think that was a good thing.
Yes.
But it also made it so like, well, you only basically get an effect from one of that covenant if you have like all 5 Night Fae for the other side.
What me of was Court of Stars, where like all the classes got buffs or things.
Or the professions there.
Like or in particular, like some of the Legion dungeons actually the professions as well. But like if you had a particular paladin with a particular artifact weapon, then you would get extra damage or things like that. So that's what it makes me think of. And here's the thing, I don't necessarily hate it. I actually do think that they basically have made fortified something that you have to worry about all the time. And I like the fact that, okay, this enemy is going to have a rage bar, so they don't have mana, which means they ignore armor. So you obviously don't want them hitting your healer. Kind of thing. Yeah. Or they inflict physical damage to their attackers when attacked because they don't have a mana bar. Okay, I'm on board with that stuff. It's just when you go into the specific types of damage, it always makes me worry that like resistances are going to come back, and I don't want resistances back. People, don't do it.
So something I wonder is like how big of a difference will this make? Say you're an arcane mage versus a fire mage, and it's the weak for arcane. Well, all those enemies are going to take 10% extra damage from the arcane mage, but not the fire mage, which will give the arcane mage an edge on the others.
Right. I'm already going to tell you, for all the sites like Icy Veins, do not be taking damage meters during any of these specific affixes, because it's going to screw everything up.
Right, but it's like that the arcane mage will be better for that, assuming all else is equal, which obviously won't be. But it's only like does not apply to the bosses. It's only say half of the trash.
Right.
So is that like maybe 3-4% extra damage overall?
Well, and for all the people who are saying like, well, it's just 10%. We don't know what trinkets are going to do yet. We don't know what rings are going to do yet. Are we going to have rings that also add increased arcane damage? Do we have trinkets that will do that? So at that point, you could be walking into an affix with plus 45% arcane damage. You're broken at that point. That's typically my worry.
I feel like this will only be like 10% on top of what you already have, which like arcane, 90% of the damage is arcane. So that's still an overall buff of maybe 3-4% overall for the damage you do in the dungeon.
Yeah, it just depends on because again, this is just going to fuel min-maxers. So at that point, they're going to do everything in their power to increase their arcane damage just to see if it gives them that extra edge.
Yeah, so yes, if you're min-maxing it, you will want to take the classes and whatever else that's good. Mm-hmm. But I feel like it won't be detrimental enough to more casual players who let's hit the achievement for the season, or maybe ever how high the gear goes. Mm-hmm. I don't think it'll be detrimental to that, but if you're really pushing the plus 15s or whatever,
it's then only going to matter once we get in there, and then we can determine that. Because the one that worries me is the 10% increased nature damage, but also has 30% increased damage from bleeds. So at that point, a feral druid is going to be walking in very powerful because of all of the bleeds that they have. So it just depends on how they do things, but it's easy enough to fix because if it does tend to be overpowered, we don't have to cut things by too much.
Yeah, and maybe they say, oh, okay, there's a lot more bleed damage than we thought. Let's make it 20% and keep it more in line.
Right. So at that point, maybe it's not going to be too bad, but it has the potential to be.
Though, do you know what percent of Feral's overall damage is bleeds?
In War Within, no idea. Because
or in Dragonflight,
now we have the hero specs that we have to consider. If this had been a past expansion, a lot. I would not say over 50%, but I would say, up to about 50%, an additional 50% of their numbers is probably dependent on things like RIP.
Yeah, so that would be 50%, assuming it's the same for War Within, which we don't know if that's true. So that'd be a 15% increase on enemies who are affected by it, which is not all of them and is not bosses. So now you're probably back down to around 5% overall. Definitely
which actually does make me wonder. We do know some of the tier set bonuses for War Within. Let me see. Do we have any of those affecting Rip? Because that will definitely play into it.
Yeah. So it will be a boost, but I don't think it'll affect people too much beyond the min-maxers. Though if you are pugging it, you have people there who like have super high standards, so that might be an issue.
Yeah.
But if you're like playing with your guild or your friends, I don't think it'll matter enough to like not get an invite for those.
Okay, so I can actually answer this right now. According to Wowhead, at least with the beta and alpha coverage, the prototype feral sets are based around Tiger's Fury, which is just an overall critical strike buff, and also based around critical strike being around your ferocious bite, rampant ferocity, and primal wrath. So at that point, no, it would not incorporate into the bleeds, but it will incorporate into the strikes of like ferocious bite. So
yeah,
this is actually probably one of the first times in a while that feral is going to be more built into ferocious bite as opposed to rip.
Huh. Yeah, and it looks like from the hero talents, those don't really tie into bleeding.
No. So at that point, like maybe at least with druids, you wouldn't have to worry about it. Maybe with arms warriors,
Rogues, maybe.
you might, but
oh yeah, arms warriors. I play Fury on my warrior, which
Fury
that doesn't have a lot of.
Because
It
remember,
has
arms
some,
and
but
Fury merge together, so you might have to worry about that. But I don't think it'll be too bad.
yeah, they both have Slayer, but what does Slayer do when? Okay, yeah, you just like do more damage with execute. It looks like.
Okay, yeah. So that at that point, it's not really based into the bleeds; it's based into the raw damage.
Yeah, so you have some bleeds, but I don't think a 30% buff to bleeds would be enough to make warrior super overpowered.
Yeah, I'm looking at the warrior bonuses right now. It doesn't really look like it. So a lot of it is built into their raw damage output, not necessarily to overtime buffs. I mean, there's some stuff built into Mortal Strike, but it's more built in. It's based as an effect that will go into either cleave or overpower. So at that point, yeah, it's not built into a bleed over time.
Yeah.
So
if you're min-maxing it, then yes, you'll probably like take this into account.
Mm-hmm.
But a few percent damage, I don't think is enough to like throw everything out of whack.
And like I said, if it gets out of whack, it's not a difficult fix, because basically what you're doing is you take that increased arcane damage and cut it in half. And at that point, it's totally fine. But they probably would still keep that first part, which is like, any enemy without a mana bar ignores 20% of your armor, because that's dangerous. So it's point, like it's going to be very essential that your healers not be in the mix of that.
Right, and make sure like your tanks are prepared. Maybe they don't pull as many, or they like kite more or something.
Right. So that's pretty much all of our War Within coverage, but we're not necessarily done yet, because if people remember, we have some Final Fantasy XIV. Unfortunately, we don't have our Final Fantasy XIV correspondent with us, but I think we could still talk about this.
So you don't want to go there and wake him up for this?
Oh, I mean, I could, but I don't think there would be a point at this point. He's probably in bed.
I mean, he doesn't have to be awake long to talk about Final Fantasy.
I'll shoot him a text and we can start talking about this and see what happens. But
I was being sarcastic, but if you want to, go ahead.
I'll text him anyway, because I mean, I've already got to send him announcements and whatnot. It was a big week for announcements.
All right, you can blame this one on me.
There you go. So first things first, this is actually something that I think overall is a quality of life measure that can be implemented not just in Dawntrail, but also in other MMOs. So Dawntrail is going to be adding in a quality of life change in regards to dungeon running. Let me explain the situation to you, Rising Sun, and you tell me how many times it's actually happened. You get to a boss, somebody's messing around and kind of effing around, or maybe they have an extreme amount of lag, and you wipe. Overall, you wipe on stupid crap on a boss that you probably shouldn't have wiped to. Except, here's the thing. In that dungeon, from boss A to boss B, there's a really long run ahead of you. And maybe with some trash that hasn't been killed yet because you prioritize certain packs in order to get to that boss quicker. Instead of having to do that long run of shame back to the boss, Dawntrail will be incorporating a new system where if you die to the boss, because wipes happen, you will then be able to get access to an NPC, or in this case, they call it a Frosty Mogborn, that will be able to teleport you to the boss room so that you can get right back into your progression.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, especially because, what was my thought? Oh, a lot of the Final Fantasy characters, like, they don't have that much movement speed.
Yes.
So if you're, like, in one of the big Alliance raids, that takes forever to get to the next one, or, like, it's just, like, the end of the wing if you wipe. So, yeah, that would be nice.
I've dealt with a lot of the earlier dungeons, and I haven't really seen, like, dungeon length as being a problem, but it's always been a problem in raid dungeons, because raid dungeons are huge.
Yeah, and that's part of the point of them.
Right. So at that point, it would be cooler. I mean, we've had teleports incorporated into WoW and other MMOs, but some of the time it's not like directly to the boss room. It's instead like a couple of rooms over. So
yeah, I feel like I noticed, like, well, like when in Mirror Soul, you have like the giant trees you can heal up, which give you movement speed buff when you like walk, and that helps you get back after wipes a lot faster. So that's nice.
Yeah, we've had elements like that in previous raids, and I've always welcomed them. But a straight up teleporter pad is always welcome also.
Yeah,
especially in places like Ulduar where it's like multi-tiered and you're trying to figure things out. I could already tell you one other thing why I think this is a really big quality of life deal. And I wished I'd had it when I was actually actively raiding. Because I don't know if you've had this kind of a guildmate, but I did. Where apparently they either A, got lost in dungeons really easy, to the point where they would literally fall down pits all the time. Or one of my former guild leaders, he was on a crappy PC, on crappy internet, in a crappy sector of where he lived. And so, yeah, this guy got lag all the time. He was actually a really good tank, but he got lag all the freaking time, especially in raid dungeons, if there was trash and whatnot. So what would happen in a lot of these cases is that his future wife, who was the other guild leader and also the leader of the healing team, she would then have to get her character all the way over there, then log out and log into his character because she had better internet in a better area, and she could get him back to where he needed to be, then come back and res everybody.
I see why that would be an issue then.
Yeah, right? Because that basically adds an extra 10, 20 minutes to an already like 30-minute break that you had to do to get everybody back for that raid wipe.
Yeah.
So at that point, if we had something like this, it would have been so welcome. Because either A, we wouldn't have to worry about the one person who kept getting lost and killed again because she didn't notice that there was a hole in the ground. Or we wouldn't have to do the whole, oh yeah, he's got a crappy PC and he can't get himself back there.
Yeah.
This would be a much better idea to be able to implement. So for me, it's kind of a welcome addition, and I kind of wish WoW would also implement this later on. But I've already seen the hardcore people going, no, you're just holding people's hands now.
Well, I also know people who like can get lost easily, like because they have to like go AFK after they die. They spawn. I'm like, okay, how do I get back to you guys?
Right, and that happens. Believe it or not, in MMOs, that happens a lot, especially when you're trying to bring friends into it. You know, I know that people really love the social aspects of MMOs, but they tend to forget that the social aspects include having to bring around dude who's new to MMOs, or maybe new to this MMO and doesn't necessarily know what's going on, and either gets lost or is trying to figure shit out, and that's part of the social aspect, whether you like it or not. So I think this is actually more worthwhile because it allows for just the dungeon to be able to go, and for newcomers specifically to be able to realize what we enjoy about dungeons.
Right.
Because just think if something like this was put into World of Warcraft in the classic era. I mean, do you know how big those dungeons were?
I get lost in those when I play them.
Yeah, they are raid dungeons in their own right in a lot of cases. In fact, some of them were 20-man raids that got broken up into wings. So Yeah, this would have been a welcome addition way back in the day in 2005 or 2006. So the fact that it's getting implemented now, it's a welcome change as far as I'm concerned. Do you think it hurts the hardcore element at all?
Not really, though. I'm also being distracted by the Wowhead talent calculator I went to earlier.
I mean, I guess if you really want to be hardcore about it, just don't talk to the Frosty Mogborn.
Yeah, I feel like it could make the dungeon feel smaller if you just like teleport everywhere. That's like the only way I can complain about it.
Sure, but like if we're talking about a competitive element, like say the Mythic Plus Invitational, you just don't make that available.
Yeah, or that's if you want to like penalize dying, but I also feel like, well, you already penalized enough by like wasting time on the poll, the 5 seconds per death. They already
do penalize dying. If you die, it's an extra minute on your timer.
I didn't think it was a minute, but yeah, there is a penalty though. So like, teleporting
over time. It's like I can't remember the exact thing, but it's like an extra 15 seconds, then it's an extra 30, then I think it goes up to a minute at that point. So you can't have like 20 deaths in the Mythic Plus Invitational.
And I guess like it's like all the teams are under that. So if all the teams have the teleport, then they're even. So they already have the penalty. So why make it run back
and even then,
longer?
Like, if you want to incorporate a dungeon that maybe has a notorious kind of feel to it, you could basically say in those competitive elements, okay, this one gets it, this one gets the teleport, and that's it. And if you have to use that teleport, add a penalty to it. So like it's obviously if they died, then they're gonna have to use the teleport anyway. As soon as you use the teleport, that's the 15-second penalty, You could easily do something to that extent. So that's this update. The second update is actually an interesting discussion that I think blends not just into FF14, but also into MMOs in general. Yoshi P, the creator, Naoki Yoshida, Yoshi P, the producer of FF14, was caught in a discussion with a number of people. In fact, it never really ended. He's still kind of having this discussion somewhere on the internet, where basically he was talking about new jobs or classes in Final Fantasy XIV. And the premise that a lot of people aren't entirely on board with, and hence why it's gone on so long, is because the premise that he is making is that if they're going to pick a new job or a new class to go into FF14, he doesn't want to be restricted by what would be considered to be like the canon of a particular lore, determining what classes are in that universe, or determining what, a particular lore of an expansion would be. Basically, the way that he wants to do things is if he creates a job, if he creates a class, first of all, it has to be fun. And if it fits into the lore of that expansion, great. If it doesn't necessarily fit in, find a way to be able to make it work. But he doesn't want to necessarily be tied down by it. And the biggest discussion against him on this has been because Final Fantasy has so many job classes that have existed throughout the many myriad of games that have happened, he always gets asked, like, when are you going to implement this one obscure class from Final Fantasy III that nobody remembers? And so his answer to this was like, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it because it's fun. I want to do it because people will want to play it. And the biggest knock against him has been the introduction of the Viper in this case, not the Pictomancer. People actually like the fact that the Pictomancer was implemented, although I guess the fact that they don't have a particular spell attached to them is kind of an irritation, but Yoshi P doesn't want to do that. But a lot of people have not liked the Viper because it doesn't really fit. It's never existed before in Final Fantasy. Why couldn't you go and make a Berserker from Final Fantasy V? Or why couldn't you go and make a insert obscure class from Final Fantasy X-2 here? Why couldn't you put a Lady Luck in the game? Kind of thing. And so it sparked a lot of debate in the MMO community about creating creating jobs or classes in general, and whether or not they actually have to be tied to the lore of that given series.
Yeah, and well, what's interesting, like all the Final Fantasy games, like they have standard rules they follow, but they're all like their independent stories.
Right.
So why wouldn't Final Fantasy 14 have a job that hasn't been seen before if it's its own world?
Well, more importantly, they're all based in their own lore. So what you're
Yeah.
basically telling me, Rising Sun, is that 14 is based in its own lore?
Yeah, so like why does 14 have to be like one of the others?
Exactly.
I think if it makes sense, if they have a good idea, it's like, okay, let's grab the Final Fantasy 3 class that we have an idea how to make it work good in an MMO. Let's definitely go do it.
Right.
But if they're like, whoa, this is a cool idea, it doesn't fit anything else, but like, so why not?
But that's the thing, is that I don't like, I tend to be on Yoshi P's side of this, is that if you're going to do it, it has to be fun. It like, and that's going to make sense for MMOs across the board. The class has to be fun and engaging, otherwise, why make it? You know, in some cases, some people might make this argument that like early on, the monk class or the Death Knight class or the Demon Hunter class weren't necessarily a fun element. I do think that there was enough element there to make a toolkit based around them.
Yeah. Well, and we also had like more recently we had evokers, which there's never been like.
Oh, dude, evokers were such a question mark because
yeah, like
how do you make a dragon class? Like, why can't we just be dragon warriors kind of thing? And so it took a lot of convincing from Blizzard to get the evoker to sell.
Yes, like they were trying to think, okay, we're doing a dragon expansion, okay, dragon class, but that doesn't work for an MMO gameplay. So like, okay, let's create something completely new, tie that into dragons, and create something that I think is a really fun class and really unique.
Right, and that's where I think that they succeeded in the evoker. Because the original concept of it when they introduced Dragonflight for the first time was like, you get to play as a dragon. That's not enough to be able to justify it to people. It was only when they got the evokers in their hands that they were able to say, okay, this toolkit's fun. I want to play with it.
Is able to like channel into like, instead of like the being a big dragon thing, is like dragons tie into so many different types of magic, so how those blend together. Like you have the arcane, you have the fire for the devastation, more into like the time things with in bronze for the healing.
Well, not only fire, but you had the restorative fire. So you had the unique kind of fire that dragons have access to.
Yeah, because like Alex Strauss, like she's a dragon of life, like the red fire. It's not something you'd think of outside of WoW, but it fits to the evoker.
Right.
And I like how like was it Living Flame like damages and heals. In fact, the first time I played Preservation, I forgot that was a healing button.
Right.
Like I feel like I'm missing something. I was like, oh wait, the key, my one button.
Where's my basic heal? Oh wait, it's my damage ability.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I did that too. When I messed around with Preservation for the first time, I'm like, this is way too confusing. I can't do this.
Yeah.
And so at that point, like, I eventually will go back to Preservation, but I messed around with it in one dungeon. I'm like, no, I need more time. I need more time to adjust to this.
Yeah, it did not click for me. Like, I'm sure if I tried it more, I like it more, but it was like, I'll stick to DPS or augmentation.
It was the same problem that I had with Legion when they introduced the holy, because they were incorporating, damaging abilities that could also heal. And so the first time I explored this was Holy Paladin doing the artifact for that. And I'm just
oh no.
Oh, here's all my healing abilities. Oh, but they do damage? Oh, no. Especially when I'm just like sitting, because again, I'm not like the most epic of healers, okay? I do use Healbot. And so at that point, I'm literally looking at it and going, I'm supposed to be using those in Healbot. And it didn't click for a while. And I'm glad I only did it with Holy, because Discipline in Legion was a whole other monster.
Oh yeah, I tried that, and that was a lot.
Oh man, when I did the Discipline artifact to record that, it took a couple of attempts, and I was getting seriously frustrated with myself, especially since I didn't have mods.
Yeah, whenever I play Priest, it's either Shadow or Holy, because those make sense.
Yes.
Disc, my brain needs adjustment.
It really does, and who knows, maybe War Within will fix a lot of that, but that's kind of why, is like, when you're basically saying, oh, this does damage, but also heals. And it just kind of threw me for a loop. And I never really got on board with it. But kind of going back into this, like, we're talking about elements of classes that maybe were weird or are fanciful, especially now that we have War Within, which is going to be adding whole new things to the mix for a lot of these deals. The last thing I want to have happen is like, you know, there's a lot of talk that in Midnight we're going to get the Void Hunter hero class. Okay, but that makes me ask the question. We already have a hunter. We already have a Dark Ranger spec of that hunter.
Yeah.
What's going to make a Void Hunter any different from a regular hunter? Oh,
yeah,
but they
it
get to
feels
cast
like
void magic. Oh, so like a Shadow Priest. And
yeah, it's like
that's when you
what's
start
the,
having the problems.
yeah, well, like the question was like with the Demon Hunter, like, well, what is a Demon Hunter? We already have the demo lock, so they like had to like adjust how the Warlocks work to make the Demon Hunter its own thing.
Right. And so at that point, this is where I tend to agree with Yoshi P on this. Is like, okay, I'm okay with them like creating an entirely new class that maybe doesn't mesh with a particular expansion that's coming out, but maybe it meshes with something else, like a previous expansion. And so they're finding a way to be able to bring that other expansion into modern times. Okay, I'm totally on board with that. Let's mess around with that. But
or maybe it's more.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Or maybe it's more like it's more of a side story part thing instead of the main expansion theme.
Right. And so at that point, I don't have a problem with that existing. My only deal is like, okay, let's go ahead and incorporate a Berserker job class because that existed in previous expansions. Okay, how many people remember how Berserkers worked in Final Fantasy V? Berserkers permanently had the Berserk debuff. So what? You're going to incorporate that into the framework of this toolkit? So what you're basically telling me is that an AI is going to play the character for me. That doesn't sound very fun. That sounds boring because I'm basically watching a game play itself. So you can complain about it all you want, but at the same time, I'd rather have you work on something that is going to be fun and fanciful, and if it has Final Fantasy lore to it, all the better. You know? Or the other idea that I brought up was Lady Luck, because we've had gambling classes or gambler classes before in past Final Fantasy games. To some that might be fun, but to others who aren't as lucky, a Lady Luck class is not going to be that fun, is what I'm saying.
And if you're like going into like raiding where you need your DPS to be good, and you're sometimes just unlucky and get bad DPS.
Yeah, but what if you have a bad day? Yeah, you get kicked out of your raid spot because you're having a bad day. That's fun.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I have that issue. Or, I mean, for crying out loud, Evilise is part of the continuity of FF14. Do you know how many job classes are from that haven't been implemented?
I don't know what that is, so no.
How many people are waiting for the Calculator expansion?
Oh, I want that one.
Well, yes, because
I'm weird.
It's the game.
Exactly.
But what I'm saying is like, that isn't necessarily something that people are going to look at and go, that doesn't look very fun. We think it's fun because we played calculators and we've broken the game with them. Or another good example is Oracles from Tactics, who are basically supposed to be like the Affliction Warlock. They basically do nothing but apply debuffs and status ailments to enemies. Well, to some people that playstyle might be fun. Others, not so much. I don't even think there is a 14 job class that implements a style like that. Is there?
Yeah, because it used to be Summoner, but like they don't do dots anymore. I think Black Mage is the one that has the most dots of any of the casters.
So at that point, it doesn't really make sense to have an Oracle job class, and instead I'd rather have you do something else. Especially when a lot of the aesthetic from Tactics for the Oracle was like East Asian kind of mythology, and maybe that doesn't fit with your new expansion.
Yeah, I feel like you could do like a dot class.
You could.
But the afflictions I feel like are hard to balance because like you don't want to like just stun the boss because, well, now you just completely bypass its mechanics or like slow its attack. That just makes it too powerful unless you like balance it carefully.
Well, and more importantly, if you could probably implement a dot class, but does it necessarily need to be an Oracle? Because, you know, we already have like a bunch of different job classes that haven't existed in FF14 as far as I'm aware of. I mean, the Viper's another example, but I mean, what was it? The Gun Mage doesn't necessarily exist in other Final Fantasy games. I mean, one of the other ways that you could do it, lore-wise, would be like the Astrologian that existed from Tactics, and it's just like all your debuffs are space-based, space and time-based.
Yeah, and it's like they might have taken ideas like, okay, we have this overall concept and theme, but the gameplay is something we come up with for an MMO.
Right. And so at that point, I would much rather, if the toolkit works, that's what makes the class. Because ultimately, it is always going to be toolkits that determine whether or not that class is powerful, playable, etc. And if it doesn't have a powerful enough toolkit, like, we brought up the Evoker. If the Evoker didn't have a lot of the stuff that makes it fun for people, nobody would be playing.
Yeah, they need to figure out, they were like starting from scratch, like, what toolkit do we want to give this? And like, okay, let's add in some dots, let's add in the different types of magic, see, like, figure out, like, what is the specialty of all those? Like, you have Arcane, which is more like debuff, multi-target, Fire is more like direct damage or damage over time.
Yeah, and
like build from there.
The other thing that also can go into it is, like, before we had ever heard of augmentation, I remember so many people basically saying that the third spec for Evokers was going to be a melee spec that was going to be based around the Black Dragonflight and the Bronze Dragonflight. Now, ultimately, the same kind of aesthetics got put into augmentation, but at that time, when people were saying it was going to be a melee spec, like, everybody was looking at the Evoker and going, they don't really have that much melee toolkit for them. I don't see how you could improve on this. And ultimately, we were wrong, because augmentation was ultimately the way they decided to go. And so but just think, if it had been the melee option and we had very little options to work with, then people wouldn't have liked that spec. And
yeah, you would have, like, it would need to, like, be completely retooled, while augmentation is different, but still fits the overall toolkit of an Evoker.
Well, and it fits the toolkit of an Evoker, and it fulfills a demand that people have had for the longest time. We want to be buffers. We want to be like the classic paladins. We want to be able to apply buffs all the time and support our teammates instead of just worrying about solely healing or solely tanking. And so it filled a niche that was in demand at that time. And I always think that, like, a class and its mythos and its toolkit should always, like, you need to have those bare bones before you start filling in the lore of it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it ain't gonna work.
And
and for all the people that want to scream at me, but the monk, guys, in World of Warcraft lore, the monk lore was not that prevalent. They had to build a lot of that lore with Pandaria to be able to do it. I know many people who are screaming for a monk class, except the way that World of Warcraft worked at that point, there was no way they could have done it.
Yeah, so like to figure out, we're going to make a monk, figure it out, like, what makes sense for that. Similar with the Evoker, I don't know, like, how the different pieces came together, but they, like, built the lore at the same time as the class.
Well, apparently they'd been working on the monk toolkit all the way back in Burning Crusade, when Pandarans were going to be the Alliance race. And they took them that long to narrow down what the monk needed to be.
And even that, like, the monk has changed a ton, like, from when it was first announced to released to
just
now.
Imagine if it had come out in Burning Crusade with the information they had at that point, which was bare bones. It wouldn't have been a fun class.
And even then, like, I guess, like, Windwalker's okay, but, like, Brewmaster feels like overly complicated.
Yeah.
So it's like, I feel like they still don't have, like, a good vision of, like, what exactly it should be.
Well, and I'm guaranteeing you, the depth that Windwalker and Mistweaver and Brewmaster had in Mists of Pandaria, they didn't have that depth in Burning Crusade. And so at that point, like, you would have basically been bringing in a whole other class that would have had useless specs and ultimately would have been stuck in either, like, a healing or a DPS role, because, again, this was Burning Crusade, warriors still ruled the tanking scene, and so at that point a tanking spec would have been worthless on it.
Yeah.
And so it would either have been relegated to damage or it would have been relegated over to healing. And it probably wouldn't have been good at either. So that's why I'm saying, like, if you want to take that extra time to build that toolkit, to build the lore around it and give us a worthwhile final product, go ahead and do that. And if it means that it doesn't necessarily mesh with whatever obscure class that you want from Final Fantasy III, that's the way it goes. And that's why I'm saying I agree with Yoshi P here. I think that in this case, especially in an MMO space, the toolkit needs to matter the most. It has to be a fun and playful and a fun playing experience. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's going to fail on arrival, and then at that point, it becomes a laughingstock. I mean, Monk was a fun character class to add into Pandaria, but it couldn't get over Pandarans. Like, for all the people that want to say that the Mists of Pandaria trailer is the most hated reveal trailer ever, it wasn't because of the Monk. It was because Pandarans. People
were
not want Pandarans.
And now I feel like they're one of the most beloved races.
Yes, they are, and it's the dumbest thing ever, but I just love the people that want to point out to me, well, the Monk was a failure on a right. No, it wasn't. In fact, a lot of people, Preach included, loved the Monk in Mists of Pandaria. It was just the other race that was tied to it. And thankfully, it wasn't just tied to that race, because that's ultimately that would have killed it. But the fact that I could make a human monk, that fixed it.
Yeah.
So, that being said, we are actually over 2 hours at this point, and going into 2.5. So we probably better wrap this up. But I'm gonna let you have the final words on this. Do you agree with Yoshi P on this, or do you think he's in the wrong here?
I want to play a Pictomancer still, so take that as you will.
Exactly. I actually wouldn't mind messing around with Pictomancer.
Yes,
just because of the 6 lore.
Yeah, I need to play more Final Fantasy soon, so maybe that's what I'll go do when I get back from this next trip.
We actually all need to get onto an MMO together at some point. Unfortunately, busy schedules.
And my subscription for WoW is expiring in 1 day, so I might have time for something else soon.
Yay!
So it also says my subscription expires on June 20th, which is yesterday. And I played it today, so I don't know how that worked, but okay.
They gave you some extra time because they loved you.
That might be what my druid broke.
Well, probably. That being said, though, just to kind of wrap things up, Rising. I was about to say Alex. Rising Sun, if people want to reach out to you for the various opinions that you've displayed here with both WoW as well as FF14, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, I would say Twitter, but I've deleted both my Twitter accounts. YouTube, which I post on like once a year. Tumblr, which I use for non-anime related things, so that probably isn't the place to find me. I do post my thoughts on anime as I'm watching it in my Discord, so come find me there.
There you go.
You can find me by throwing things at Drak to get his attention. That's always fun.
Yes. Are you still streaming on Twitch?
Yes, I have a new stream setup in VTuber coming out soon, so I'll get to that soon.
You have a VTuber? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Oh my gosh!
My friend got one made for me. It's never been shown yet, but I'll send you a picture of him.
I would love to see it. Honestly, I would be very interested.
Like I mentioned. Yeah, I mentioned my friend, having a VTuber would be nice, because I prefer not to be on camera. I was like, do you know where I can get a cheap one? She's like, I have an idea. I'll make one.
Okay. Well, to each their own. Like me personally, I don't know if I would ever make a VTuber of myself, just because I don't necessarily hate being on camera. Like, my problem right now is and one of the main reasons I'm not streaming actively right now is parent stuff. Ultimately, I'm too busy trying to take care of parent and family stuff that we can't make streams work. Because by the time that we're done with all the family stuff for that day, me and Andrea are both just so wrecked.
Oh yeah.
We want to go to bed. But yeah, like I've actually had people going, well, why don't you, like, VTubers are the hot craze, why not go ahead and do it? I don't know if I ever would, because I don't mind being on camera.
Yeah, and that's not what makes streaming fun for you, so.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, it's like the gameplay, and for me, it's just like having everybody on a giant couch, so it doesn't really matter.
But, like, for me, like, I want to separate like my professional life from like my internet life, so that's why I prefer not to be on camera.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, if people want to reach out to me, you can obviously do so via my Twitter. When I've actually been taking Twitter off for this whole month, so I've missed all the Pride Month nonsense, and I'm so happy that I did, because I've just been seeing the explosions happening after the fact and going, yeah, I'm glad I wasn't on Twitter for this. But yeah, I do have a Twitter. We will eventually get back to live streams, I promise. But in the meantime, you can check out all of the YouTube content that we have available, where we at least try to, put up one of these big podcasts, as well as either like a Beyblade podcast or a bunch of mini casts that people can get pissed at my opinions about. You can do all of that. And obviously you're on my YouTube channel, so you can check that out. Or if you're listening via podcast platforms, you can do so on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Player.fm, as well as Spotify. And the next time that we are here, I'm not sure if it's going to be an MMO thing, but it might be. I don't know if it's going to be for the beta. Who knows? We might be into launch at that point. I don't know. But we will definitely let you know when the next roundtable discussion happens. In the meantime, though, take care, everybody. We will see you guys soon, and we will be back for the next one. Until then, hopefully you guys also enjoyed the Rising Sun Bazaar adventure, because that will probably get animated at some point.
I really want to see these.
I do too. And I'm going to pay through the nose to get them. I'm guaranteeing you that.
I also want to know like what I actually said before, because I forgot what my first story was.
You know what? I forget them too, like when I listen to them, but then I have the audio file and I can just go pull them up and they're still entertaining. So I'm okay with it.
I'm glad I can entertain you.
See you guys for the next one.
All right, night everyone.